Section 10 of The Golden Bough, A Study in Magic and Religion, Part 5, Spirits of the Corn and of the Wild, Volume 2, by Sir James George Frazer. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information on a volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recorded by Leon Harvey. Chapter 14, The Propitation of Wild Animals by Hunters, Part 2. Respect shown to dead sables. When Siberian sable hunters have caught a sable, no one is allowed to see it, and they think that if good or evil be spoken of the captured sable, no more sables will be caught. A hunter has been known to express his belief that the sables could hear what was said of them as far off as Moscow. He said that the chief reason why the sable hunt was now so unproductive was that some live sables had been sent to Moscow. There they had been viewed with astonishment as strange animals, and the sables cannot abide that. Another, though minor, cause of the diminished take of sables was, he alleged, that the world is now much worse than it used to be, so that nowadays a hunter will sometimes hide the sable which he has got instead of putting it into the common stock. This also, said he, the sables cannot abide. A Russian traveller happened once to enter a Gilyak hut in the absence of the owner, observed a freshly killed sable hanging on the wall. Seeing him look at it, the housewife, in consternation, hastened to muffle the animal in a fur cap, after which it was taken down, wrapped in birch bark, and put away out of sight. Despite the high price he offered for it, the traveller's efforts to buy the animal were unavailing. It was bad enough, they told him, that he, a stranger, had seen the dead sable in its skin, but far worse consequences for the future catch of sables would follow if they were to sell him the animal entire. Bones of sables and beavers kept out of reach of dogs, lest the spirits of the dead animals should be offended. Alaskan hunters preserve the bones of sables and beavers out of reach of the dogs for a year, and then bury them carefully, lest the spirits who look after the beavers and sables should consider that they are regarded with contempt, and hence no more should be killed or trapped. The Shuswap Indians of British Columbia think that if they did not throw beaver bones into the river, the beavers would not go into the traps any more, and that the same thing would happen were a dog to eat the flesh or gnaw the bone of a beaver. Carrier Indians who have trapped martens or beavers take care to keep them from the dogs, for if a dog were to touch these animals, the Indians believe that the other martens or beavers would not suffer themselves to be caught. A missionary who fell in with an old Carrier Indian asked him what luck he had in the chase. "I don't speak to me about it," replied the Indian. "There are beavers in plenty. I caught one myself immediately after my arrival here, but unluckily a dog got hold of it. You know that after that it had been impossible for me to catch another." "Nonsense," said the missionary. "Set your traps as if nothing had happened, and you will see." "That would be useless," answered the Indian in a tone of despair. "Quite useless. You don't know the ways of the beaver. If a dog merely touches a beaver, all the other beavers are angry at the owner of the dog, and always keep him away from those traps." It was in vain that the missionary tried to laugh or argue him out of his persuasion. The man persisted in abandoning his snares and giving up the hunt, because, as he asserted, the beavers were angry with him. A French traveller, observing that the Indians of Louisiana did not give the bones of beavers and otters to their dogs, inquired the reason. They told him there was a spirit in the woods who would tell the other beavers and otters, and that after they would catch no more animals of these species. The Canadian Indians were equally particular not to let their dogs gnaw the bones, or at least certain of the bones, of beavers. They took the greatest pains to collect and preserve these bones, and when the beaver had been caught in a net, they threw them into the river. To a Jesuit who argued that the beavers could not possibly know what became of their bones, the Indians replied, "You know nothing about catching beavers, and yet you will be prating about it." Before the beaver is stone dead, his soul takes a turn in the hut of the man who is killing him, and makes a careful note of what is done with his bones. If the bones are given to the dogs, the other beavers would get word of it, and would not let themselves be caught, whereas if their bones are thrown into the fire or a river, they are quite satisfied, and it is particularly gratifying to the net which caught them. Before hunting the beaver, they offered a solemn prayer to the great beaver, and presented him with tobacco, and when the chase was over, the orator pronounced a funeral oration over the dead beavers. He praised their spirit and wisdom. "You will hear no more," said he, "the voice of the chieftains who commanded you and whom you chose from among all the warrior beavers to give you laws. Your language, which the medicine men understand perfectly, will be heard no more at the bottom of the lake. You will fight no more battles with the otters, your cruel foes. No, beavers, but your skins shall serve to buy arms. We will carry your smoked hams to our children. We will keep the dogs from eating your bones, which are so hard." Deer, elk, and eland treated by the American Indians with ceremonious respect. The eland, deer, and elk were treated by the American Indians with the same punctilious respect and for the same reason. Their bones might not be given to the dogs nor thrown into the fire, nor might their fat be dropped upon the fire, because the souls of the dead animals were believed to see what was done to their bodies, and to tell it to the other beasts, living and dead. Hence, if their bodies were ill-used, the animals of that species would not allow themselves to be taken, neither in this world nor in the world to come. The houses of the Indians of Honduras were encumbered with the bones of deer, the Indians believing that if they threw the bones away, the other deer could not be taken. Among the Chicquets of Paraguay, a sick man would be asked by the medicine man whether he had not thrown away some of the flesh of the deer or turtle, and if he answered yes, the medicine man would say, "That is what is killing you. The soul of the deer or turtle has entered into your body to avenge the wrong you did it." Before the settlers of southern Mexico and the Quechis of Guatemala venture to skin a deer which they have killed, they lift up its head and burn coal before it is an offering. Otherwise a certain being named Silotaka would be angry and send them no more game. Cherokee hunters ask pardon of the deer they kill. If they fail to do so, they think that the little deer, the chief of the deer tribe, who can never die or be wounded, would track the hunter to his home by the blood dogs on the ground and would put the spirit of rheumatism into him. Sometimes the hunter, on starting for home, lights a fire in the trail behind him to prevent the little deer from pursuing him. Before they went out to hunt for deer, antelope or elk, the Apaches used to resort to sacred caves, where the medicine men propitiated with prayer and sacrifice the animal gods whose progeny they intended to destroy. The Indians of Louisiana bewailed bitterly the death of the buffaloes which they were about to kill. More than 200 of them at a time have been seen shedding crocodile tears over the approaching slaughter of the animals, while they marched in solemn procession, headed by an old man who waved a pocket handkerchief at the end of his stick, as an oriflamme, or by a woman who strutted proudly along, bearing on her back a large kettle which had been recently abstracted from the baggage of some French explorers. The Thompson Indians of British Columbia cherished many superstitious beliefs, and observed many superstitious practices in regard to deer. When a deer was killed, they said that the rest of the deer would be well pleased if the hunters butchered the animal nicely and cleanly. To waste venison displeased the animals, who after that would not allow themselves to be shot by the hunter. If a hunter was overburdened and had to leave some of the venison behind, the other deer were better pleased if he hung it up on a tree than if he let it lie on the ground. The guts were gathered and put where the blood had been spilt in butchering the beast, and the whole was covered up with a few fire boughs. In laying the boughs on the blood and guts, the men told the deer not to grieve for the death of their friend, nor to take ill that he had left some of the body behind, for he had done his best to cover it. If he did not cover it, they thought the deer would be sorry or angry, and would spoil his luck in the chase. When the head of a deer had been left behind, they commonly placed it on the branch of a tree, that it might not be contaminated by dogs and women. For the same reason they burned the bones of the slain deer, lest they should be touched by women or gnawed by dogs. And venison was never brought into a hut by the common door, because that door was used by women. It was taken through a hole made in the back of the hut. No hunter would give a deer's head to a man who was the first or second of a family, for that would make the rest of the deer very shy and hard to shoot. And telling his friends of his bag, he would generally call a buck a doe, and a doe he would call a fawn, and a fawn he would call a hare. This he did that he might not seem to the deer to brag. The Lillooet Indians of British Columbia threw the bones of animals, particularly those of the deer and the beaver, into the water, in order that dogs should not defile or eat them, and thereby offend the animals. When the hunter committed the bones to the water, he generally prayed to the dead animal, saying, "See, I treat you respectively. Nothing shall defile you. Have pity on me, so I may kill more of you. May I be successful in hunting and trapping." The Canadian Indians would not eat the embryos of the elk, unless at the close of the hunting season, otherwise the mother elks would be shy and refuse to be caught. Porcupines, turtles, and mice treated by American Indians with ceremonious respect. Indians of the lower Frazer River regard the porcupine as their elder brother. Hence, when a hunter kills one of these creatures, he asks his elder brother's pardon and does not eat of the flesh till the next day. The Sioux would not stick an awl or needle into a turtle, for they are sure that if they were to do so, the turtle would punish them at some future time. Some of the North American Indians believed that each sort of animal had its patron or genius, who watched over and preserved it. An Indian girl having once picked up a dead mouse, her father snatched the little creature from her and tenderly caressed and fondled it. Being asked why he did so, he said that it was to appease the genius of mice, in order that he might not torment his daughter for eating the mouse. With that he handed the mouse to the girl, and she ate it. Dead foxes, turtles, deer, and pigs treated with ceremonious respect. When the Koyak have killed a fox, they take the body home and lay it down near the fire, saying, "Let the guest warm himself. When he feels warm, we will free him from his overcoat." So when the frozen carcass is thawed, they skin it and wrap long strips of grass round about it. Then the animal's mouth is filled with fish roe, and the mistress of the house gashes the flesh and puts more roe or dried meat into the gashes, making believe that the gashes are the fox's pockets, which she thus fills with provisions. Then the carcass is carried out of the house, and the people say, "Go and tell your friends that it is good to visit yonder house." Instead of my old coat, they gave me a new one still warmer with longer hair. I have eaten my fill and had my pockets well stored. You too, go and visit them. The natives think that if they neglected to observe this ceremonial, they would have no luck in hunting foxes. When an Ilo hunter of Turco land has killed an antelope of a particular kind, Antilope locariix, he erects an enclosure of branches, within which he places the lower jaw bones of all the animals he has shot. Then he pours palm wine and sprinkles meal on the bones, saying, "Ye lower jaw bones of beasts, ye are now come home. Here is food, here is drink. Therefore lead your comrades, that is, the living beasts of the forest, hither also." In the Timor-Leste Islands of the Indian archipelago, the skulls of all the turtles which a fisherman has caught are hung up under the house. Before he goes out to catch another, he addresses himself to the skull of the last turtle that he killed, and having inserted betel between its jaws, he prays the spirit of the dead animal to entice its kinfolk into the sea to come and be caught. In the Poso district of central Celebes, hunters keep the jaw bones of deer and wild pigs, which they have killed, and hang them up in their houses near the fire. Then they say to the jaw bones, "Ye cry after your comrades, that your grandfathers or nephews or children may not go away." Their notion is that the souls of the dead deer and pigs tarry near the jaw bones and attract the souls of living deer and pigs, which are thus drawn into the toils of the hunter. Thus, in all these cases, the wily savage employs dead animals as decoys to lure living animals to their doom. Ghost of Ostrich Outwitted. The Lenigua Indians of the Grand Chaco love to hunt the ostrich, but when they have killed one of these birds, and are bringing home the carcass to the village, they take steps to outwit the resentful ghost of their victim. They think that when the first natural shock of death is past, the ghost of the ostrich pulls himself together and makes after his body. Acting on this sage calculation, the Indians pluck feathers from the beast of the bird and strew them at intervals along the track. At every bunch of feathers the ghost stops to consider, "Is this the whole of my body or only a part of it?" The doubt gives him pause, and when at last he has made up his mind fully at all the bunches, and has further wasted valuable time by the zigzag course which he invariably pursues in going from one to another, the hunters are safe at home, and the bilked ghost may stalk in vain round about the village which he is too timid to enter. Eskimo's Propitation of the Spirit Who Controls Reindeer. The Eskimos of the Hudson Bay region believe that the reindeer are controlled by a great spirit who resides in a large cave near the end of Cape Chidley. The outward form of the spirit is that of a huge white bear. He obtains and controls the spirit of every reindeer that is slain or dies, and depends on his goodwill whether the people shall have a supply of reindeer or not. The sorcerer intercedes with this great spirit and prevails on him to send the deer to the hungry Eskimos. He informs the spirit that the people have in no way offended him, since he, the sorcerer, has taken great care that the whole of the meat was eaten up, and that last spring, when the does were returned to him to drop their young, none of the little or embryo forms were devoured by the dogs. After long incantations, the magician announces that the patron of the deer condescends to supply the Eskimos with the spirits of the animals in a material form, and that soon there will be plenty in the land. He charges the people to fall on and slay and thereby win the approval of the spirit, who loves to see good folk enjoying themselves, knowing that so long as the Eskimos refrain from feeding their dogs with the unborn young, the spirits of the dead reindeer will return again to his watchful care. The dogs are not allowed to taste the flesh, and until the supply is plentiful, they may not gnaw the leg bones, lest the guardian of the deer should take offence and set no more of the animals. If unfortunately a dog should get at the meat, a piece of his tail is cut off or his ears cropped to let the blood flow. Ceremonious treatment of sea beasts by the Eskimo. Again, the central Eskimo hold that sea mammals, particularly whales, ground seals, and common seals, sprang from the severed fingers of the goddess Sedna, and that therefore an Eskimo must make atonement for every such animal that he kills. When a seal is brought into the hut, the women must stop working until it has been cut up. After the capture of a ground seal, walrus, or whale, they must rest for 3 days. Not all sorts of work, however, are forbidden, for they may mend articles made of sealskin, but they may not make anything new. For example, an old tent cover may be enlarged in order to build a larger hut, but is not allowed to make a new one. Working on a new deer skins is strictly forbidden. No skins of this kind obtained in summer may be prepared before the ice has formed, and the first seal has been caught with the harpoon. Later on, as soon as the first walrus has been taken, the work must again stop until autumn comes round. Hence all families are eager to finish the work on deer skins as fast as possible, for until that is done, the walrus season may not begin. Greenlanders are careful not to fracture the heads of seals or throw them into the sea, but pile them in a heap before the door, and the souls of the seals may not be enraged and scare their brethren from the coast. Annual ceremony of returning the bladders of the sea beasts to the sea in order that the animals may come to life again. The Eskimos about Bering Strait believe that the souls of dead sea beasts, such as seals, walrus, and whales, remain attached to their bladders, and that by returning the bladders to the sea, they can cause the souls to be reincarnated in fresh bodies, and so multiply the game which the hunters pursue and kill. Acting on this belief, every hunter carefully removes and preserves the bladders of all the sea beasts that he kills, and at a solemn festival held once a year in winter, these bladders contain the souls of all the sea beasts that have been killed throughout the year, are honoured with dances and offerings of food in the public assembly room, after which they are taken out on the ice and thrust through holes into the water. For the simple Eskimos imagine that the souls of the animals, in high good humour at the kind treatment they have experienced, will thereafter be born again as seals, walrus, and whales, and from that form will flock willingly to be again spared, harpooned, or otherwise done to death by the hunters. The ceremonies observed at these annual festivals of reincarnation are elaborate. The assembly room or dancing house, kashim, kasigin, or kasigit, in which the festival is held, consists of a spacious semi-subterranean chamber entered by a tunnel which leads down to a large round cellar under the floor of the house. From the cellar you ascend into the assembly room through a hole in the floor. Wooden benches run round the apartment, which is lit by lamps. An opening in the roof serves at once as a window and a chimney. Unmarried men sleep in the assembly room at all times. They have no other home. The festival is commonly held in December, but may fall as late as January. It lasts 7 days. When the time has come to celebrate it, Each hunter brings into the assembly room the inflated bladders of all the seals, walrus, and whales that he has killed during the year. These are tied by their necks in bunches and hung up on seal spears, which are stuck in a row on the wall some 6 or 8 feet above the floor. Here food and water are offered to them, or rather to the spirits of the animals, which are supposed to be present in the bladders, and the spirits signify their acceptance of the offering by causing the bladders to swing to and fro, a movement which is really produced by a man sitting in a dark corner who pulls a string attached to the bladders. Further, the bladders are fumigated with torches of wild parsnip stalks, the aromatic smoke and red flames of which are believed to be well pleasing to the souls of the animals dangling in the bladders. Moreover, to amuse the souls, men execute curious dances before them, to the music of drums. First the dancers move slowly with a jerky action from side to side, then they gallop obliquely with arms tossed up and down, and lastly they hop and jump, always keeping perfect time to the beats of the drums. The dance is supposed to imitate the movements of seals and walrus, and again the spirits signify their pleasure by making the bladder swing backwards and forwards. During the continuance of the festival, no loud noises may be made in the assembly room for fear of alarming the souls of the animals in the bladders. If any person makes a noise by accident, all the men present raise a chorus of cries in imitation of the notes of the eider duck, to let the souls of the animals think that the unseemly disturbance proceeds from the birds and not from the people. Further, so long as the festival lasts, no wood may be cut with an iron axe in the village. The men must keep rigidly apart from the women, and no female above the age of puberty may come near the bladders suspended in the assembly room. The reason assigned being that such women are unclean and might offend the sensitive souls of the sea beasts in the bladders. But immature girls, being untainted by the pollution which attaches to adult women, may go about the bladders freely. The last and crowning scene of the festival takes place at night or just at sunrise. The spears with the bladders attached to them are passed out by the shaman into the open air through the smoke hole in the roof. When all are outside, a huge torch of wild parsnip stalks is lighted. The chief shaman takes it on his shoulder and runs with it as fast as he can across the snow and out on the ice. Behind him troop all the men carrying each his spear with the bladders of the sea beasts dangling and flapping from it, and in the rear race the women, children, and old men, howling, screaming, and making a great uproar. In the darkness the lurid flame of the torch shoots high into the air, casting a red glare over the snowy landscape and lighting up the swarm of fantastic fur-clad figures that stream along in wild excitement. Arrived at a hole which has been cut on purpose in the sea ice, the shaman plants his burning torch beside it in the snow, and every man, as he comes up, rips open his bladders and thrusts them one after the other into the water under the ice. This ends the ceremony. The souls of the dead seals, walrus, and whales are now ready to be born again in the depths of the sea, so all the people return contented to the village. At St. Michael, the men who have thrust the bladders under the ice are obliged, on their return, to leap through a fire of wild parsnip stalks, probably as a mode of ceremonial purification. For after the dance and the offering of food at the festival, the chief shaman passes a lighted torch of parsnip stalks round the assembly room, and the dancers, for their express purpose of purifying them and averting any evil influence that might bring sickness or ill luck to the hunters. Fish treated with respect by fishing tribes. For like reasons, a tribe which depends for its subsistence chiefly or in part upon fishing is careful to treat the fish with every mark of honour and respect. The Indians of Peru worship the whale for its monstrous greatness. Besides this ordinary system of worship, which prevailed throughout the coast, the people of different provinces adorned the fish that they caught in greatest abundance, for they said that the first fish that was made in the world above, for so they named heaven, gave birth to all other fish of that species, and took care to send them plenty of its children to sustain their tribe. The Peruvian Indians worshipped the various sorts of fish which they caught. For this reason they worshipped sardines in one region, where they killed more of them than any other fish, in others the skate, in others the dogfish, in others the golden fish for its beauty, in others the crawfish, in others, for want of larger gods, the crabs, where they had no other fish, or where they knew not how to catch and kill them. In short, they had whatever fish was most serviceable to them as their gods. Fish treated with respect by the North American Indians. The Kwikwetul Indians of British Columbia think that when a salmon is killed, its soul returns to the salmon country. Hence they take care to throw the bones and offal into the sea, in order that the soul may reanimate them at the resurrection of the salmon. Whereas if they burned the bones, the soul would be lost, and so it would be quite impossible for that salmon to rise from the dead. In like manner, the Ottawa Indians of Canada, believing that the souls of dead fish passed into other bodies of fish, never burned fish bones, for fear of displeasing the souls of the fish who would come no more to the nets. The Hurons also refrained from throwing fish bones into the fire, lest the souls of the fish should go and warn the other fish not to let themselves be caught, since the Hurons would burn their bones. Moreover, they had men who preached to the fish, and persuaded them to come and be caught. A good preacher was much sought after, for they thought that the exhortations of a clever man had a great effect in drawing the fish to their nets. In the Huron fishing village where the French missionary Sacrament stayed, the preacher to the fish prided himself very much on his eloquence, which was of a florid order. Every evening after supper, having seen that all the people were in their places and that a strict silence was observed, he preached to the fish. His text was that the Hurons did not burn fish bones. Then, enlarging on his theme with extraordinary unction, he exhorted and conjured and invited and implored the fish to come and be caught, and be of good courage, and to fear nothing, for it was all to serve their friends who honoured them and did not burn their bones. At Bogajim in German New Guinea, an enchanter is employed to lure the fish to their doom. He stands in a canoe on the beach with a decorated fish basket beside him and commands the fish to come from all quarters to Bogajim. When the Ainu have killed a swordfish, they thank the fish for allowing himself to be caught and invite him to come again. Among the Nootka Indians of British Columbia, it was formerly a rule that any person who had partaken of bear's flesh must rigidly abstain from eating any kind of fish for a term of 2 months. The motive for the abstinence was not any consideration for the health of the eater, but a superstitious belief that should any of the people, after tasting bear's flesh, eat of fresh salmon, cod, etc., the fish, though at ever so great a distance off, would come to the knowledge of it, and be so much offended thereat, as not to allow themselves to be taken by any of the inhabitants. Herring respected by European fishermen. The disappearance of herring from the sea about Heligoland in 1530 was attributed by the fishermen to the misconduct of 2 lads who had whipped a freshly caught herring and then flung it back into the sea. A similar disappearance of the herrings from the Moray Firth in the reign of Queen Anne was set down by some people to a breach of the Sabbath which had been committed by the fishermen, while others opined that it was due to a quarrel in which blood had been spilt in the sea. For Scotch fishermen are persuaded that if blood be drawn in a quarrel on the coast where herring are being caught, the shoal will at once take its departure and not return for that season at least. West Highland fishermen believe that every shoal of herring has its leader which it follows wherever it goes. This leader is twice as big as an ordinary herring, and the fishermen call it the king of herring. When they chance to catch it in their nets, they put it back carefully into the sea, for they would esteem it petty treason to destroy the royal fish. Compensation made to fish for catching them. The natives of the Duke of York Island annually decorate a canoe with flowers and ferns, lade it, or are supposed to lade it with shell money, and set it adrift to compensate the fish for their fellows who have been caught and eaten. When the Tarahumaras of Mexico are preparing to poison the waters of a river for the purpose of stupefying and catching the fish, they take the precaution of first making offerings to the master of the fish by way of payment for the fish of which they are about to bereave him. The offerings consist of axes, hats, blankets, girdles, pouches, and especially knives and strings of beads, which are hung to a cross or a horizontal bar set up in the middle of the river. However, the master of the fish, who is thought to be the oldest fish, does not long enjoy these good things, For next morning the owners of the various articles remove them from the river and appropriate them to their usual secular purposes. It is especially necessary to treat the first fish caught with consideration in order to conciliate the rest of the fish, whose conduct may be supposed to be influenced by the reception given to those of their kind which were the first to be taken. Accordingly, the Maoris always put back into the sea the first fish caught, with a prayer that it may tempt other fish to come and be caught. Among the Baganda, the first fish taken were treated ceremonially. Some of the fishermen took to the god Mukasa, the remainder his wife cooked, and he and she both partook of them, and he afterwards jumped over her. Ceremonious treatment of the first fish of the season. Still more stringent are the precautions taken when the fish are the first of the season. On salmon rivers, when the fish begin to run up the stream in spring, they are received with much deference by tribes who, like the Indians of the Pacific coast of North America, subsist largely upon a fish diet. To some of these tribes, a salmon is what corn is to the European, rice to the Chinese, and seals to the Eskimos. Plenty of salmon means abundance in the camp and joy at the domestic hearth. Failure of the salmon for a single season means failure and desolation, silence in the village, and sad hearts about the fire. Accordingly, in British Columbia, the Indians used to go out to meet the first fish as they came up the river. They paid court to them and would address them thus: you fish, you are all chiefs, you are all chiefs." Amongst the Tlingit or Tlingit of Alaska, the first halibut of the season is carefully handled and addressed as a chief, and a festival is given in his honor, after which the fishing goes on. Among the tribes of the lower Frazer River, when the first sockeye salmon of the season has been caught, the fisherman carries it to the chief of his tribe, who delivers it to his wife. She prays, saying to the salmon, "Who has brought you here to make us happy? We are thankful to your chief for sending you." When she has cut and roasted the salmon according to certain prescribed rules, the whole tribe is invited to partake of the fish, after they have purified themselves by drinking a decoction of certain plants, which is regarded as a medicine for cleansing the people. But widowers, widows, menstruous women, and youths may not eat of this particular salmon. Even later, when the fish has become plentiful and these ceremonies are dispensed with, the same classes of persons are not allowed to eat fresh salmon, though they may partake of the dried fish. The sockeye salmon must always be looked after carefully. Its bones have to be thrown into the river, after which the fish will revive and return to its chief in the west. Whereas if the fish are not treated with consideration, they will take their revenge, and the careless fishermen will be unlucky. Among the Songhees, or Lukunjin tribe of Vancouver Island, it is a rule that on the day when the first salmon have been caught, the children must stand on the beach waiting for the boats to return. They stretch out their little arms and the salmon are heaped on them, the heads of the fish being always kept in the direction in which the salmon are swimming, else they would cease to run up the river. So the children carry them and lay them on a grassy place, carefully keeping the heads of the salmon turned in the same direction. Round the fish are placed 4 flat stones, on which the plants hogswort, Pecudanium lysopartum nut, red paint, and bulrushes are burnt as an offering to the salmon. When the salmon have been roasted, each of the children receives one, which he or she is obliged to eat, leaving nothing over. But grown people are not allowed to eat the fish for several days. The bones of the salmon that the children have eaten may not touch the ground. They are kept in dishes, and on the 4th day an old woman who pretends to be lame gathers them in a huge basket and throws them into the sea. The Tsimshian Indians of British Columbia observe certain ceremonies when the first olachen fish of the season are caught. The fish are roasted on an instrument of elderberry wood, and the man who roasts them must wear his travelling dress, mittens, cape, and so forth. While this is being done, the Indians pray that plenty of olachen may come to their fishing ground. The fire may not be blown up, and in eating the fish they may not cool it by blowing, nor break a single bone. Everything must be neat and clean, and the rakes used for catching the fish must be kept hidden in the house. In spring, when the wind blows soft from the south and the salmon begin to run up the Klamath River, the Carracks of California dance with salmon to ensure a good catch. One of the Indians, called the Karia or God Man, retires to the mountains and fasts for 10 days. On his return, the people flee, while he goes to the river, takes the first salmon they catch, eats some of it, and with the rest kindles a sacred fire in the sweating house. No Indian may take a salmon before this dance is held, nor for 10 days after it, even if his family are starving. The Karaks also believe that a fisherman will take no salmon if the poles of which his spirit booth is made were gathered on the riverside where the salmon might have seen them. The poles must be brought from the top of the highest mountain. The fisherman will also labour in vain if he uses the same poles a second year in booths or weirs, because the old salmon will have told the young ones about them. Among the Indians of the Columbia River, when the salmon make their first appearance in the river, they are never allowed to be cut crosswise, nor boiled, but roasted, nor are they allowed to be sold without the heart being first taken out, nor to be kept overnight, but must be all consumed or eaten the day they are taken out of the water. All these rules are observed for about 10 days. They think that if the heart of a fish were eaten by a stranger at the beginning of the season, they would catch no more fish. Hence they roast and eat the hearts themselves. There is a favourite fish of the Aino which appears in their rivers about May and June. They prepare for the fishing by observing rules of ceremonial purity, and when they have gone out to fish, the women at home must keep strict silence or the fish would hear them and disappear. When the first fish is caught, he is brought home and passed through a small opening at the end of the hut, but not through the door, for if he were passed through the door, the other fish would certainly see him and disappear. This may partially explain the custom observed by other savages of bringing game in certain cases into their huts, not by the door but by the window, the smoke hole, or by a special opening at the back of the hut. Some savages preserve the bones of the animals they kill in order that the animals may come to life again. With some savages, a special reason for respecting the bones of game, and generally of the animals which they eat, is a belief that, if the bones are preserved, they will in course of time be reclothed with flesh, and thus the animal will come to life again. This is therefore clearly for the interest of the hunter to leave the bones intact, since to destroy them would be to diminish the future supply of game. Many of the Minatari Indians believe that the bones of those bisons which they have slain and harvested of flesh rise again clothed with renewed flesh, and quicken with life, and become fat, and fit for slaughter at the succeeding June. Hence on the western prairies of America, the skulls of buffaloes may be seen arranged in circles at symmetrical piles awaiting the resurrection. After feasting on a dog, the Dakotas carefully collect the bones, scrape, wash, and bury them, partially, as it is said, to testify to the dog species that in feasting upon one of their number, no disrespect was meant for the species itself, and partly also from a belief that the bones of the animal will rise and reproduce another. Among the Eskimos of Baffin Land and Hudson Bay, when a boy has killed his first seal, his mother gathers all the bones and throws them into a seal hole. They think that these bones will become seals, which the boy will catch in later life. The Yuracares Indians of Bolivia are at great pains to collect all the bones of the beasts, birds, and fishes which they eat, and to throw them into a stream, bury them in the depths of the forest, or burn them in the fire, in order that the animals of the sort killed may not be angry and may allow themselves to be killed again. In sacrificing an animal, the Lapps regularly put aside the bones, eyes, ears, heart, lungs, sexual parts, if the animal was male, and a morsel of the flesh from each limb. Then after eating the remainder of the flesh, they laid the bones and the rest in anatomical order in a coffin, and buried them with the usual rites, believing that the god to whom the animal was sacrificed would reclothe the bones with flesh, and restore the animal to life in Japamanimo, the subterranean world of the dead. Sometimes, as after feasting on a bear, they seem to have contented themselves with thus burying the bones. Thus the Lapps expected the resurrection of the slain animal to take place in another world, resembling, in this respect, the Kamchatkans, who believed that every creature, down to the smallest fly, would rise from the dead and live underground. On the other hand, the North American Indians looked for the resurrection of the animals in the present world. The habit, observed especially by Mongolian peoples, of stuffing the skin of a sacrificed animal, or stretching it on a framework, points rather to a belief in a resurrection of the latter sort. The objection commonly entertained by primitive peoples to break the bones of the animals which they have eaten or sacrificed may be based either on a belief in the resurrection of the animals or on a fear of intimidating other creatures of the same species and offending the ghosts of the slain animals. The reluctance of North American Indians and Eskimos to let dogs gnaw the bones of animals is perhaps only a precaution to prevent the bones from being broken. Some savages preserve or destroy the bones of men in order to assist or prevent the resurrection. We have already seen that some rude races believe in a resurrection of men, as well as of beasts, and it's quite natural that people who entertain such a belief should take care of the bones of their dead, in order that the original owners of the bones may have them at hand at the critical moment. Hence, in the Mexican territories of Coatzacoalcos and Yaluta, where the Indians thought that the dead would rise again, the bones of the departed were deposited in baskets and hung up on trees, that their spirits might not be obliged to grub in the earth for them at the resurrection. On the other hand, the Luricha tribe of Central Australia, who eat their enemies, take steps to prevent their coming to life again, which might prove very inconvenient by destroying the bones and especially the skulls of the bodies on which they have banqueted. Unquestioning faith of savages in the immortality of animals. The preceding review of customs observed by savages for the conciliation and multiplication of animals, which they hunt and kill, is fitted to impress us with a lively sense of the unquestioning faith which primitive man reposes in the immortality of the lower creatures. He appears to assume, as an axiom too obvious to be disputed, that beasts, birds, and fishes have souls like his own, which survive the death of their bodies and can be reborn in other bodies to be again killed and eaten by the hunter. The whole series of customs described in the foregoing pages, customs which are apt to strike the civilized reader as quaint and absurd, rests on this fundamental assumption. The savage faith in the human immortality is commonly supposed to be deduced from a primitive theory of dreams. A consideration of them suggests a doubt whether the current explanation of the savage belief in human immortality is adequate to account for all the facts. That belief is commonly deduced from a primitive theory of dreams. The savage, it is said, fails to distinguish the visions of sleep from the realities of waking life, and accordingly, when he is dreamed of his dead friends, he necessarily concludes that they have not wholly perished, but that their spirits continue to exist in some place and some form, though in the ordinary course of events they elude the perceptions of his senses. On this theory, the conceptions, whether gross or refined, whether repulsive or beautiful, which savages and perhaps civilized men have formed of the state of the departed, would seem to be no more than elaborate hypotheses constructed to account for appearances in dreams. These towering structures, for all their radiant gloomy grandeur, for all the massy strength and solidarity with which they present themselves to the imagination of many, may turn out on inspection to be mere visionary castles built of clouds and vapour, which a breath of reason suffices to melt into air. But can a theory of dreams account for the savage belief in the immortality of animals? But even if we grant for the sake of argument that this theory offers a ready explanation of the widespread belief in human immortality, it is less easy to see how the theory accounts for the corresponding belief of so many races in the immortality of the lower animals. In his dreams, the savage recognizes the images of his departed friends by those familiar traits of feature, voice, and gesture which characterizes them in life. But can we suppose that he recognizes dead beasts, birds, and fishes in like manner? That their images come before him in sleep with all the particular features, the minute individual differences which distinguish them in life from their fellows, so that when he sees them, he can say to himself, for example, "This is the very tiger that I speared yesterday. His carcass is dead, but his spirit must be still alive." Or, "That is the very salmon I caught and ate this morning. I certainly killed his body, but clearly I have not succeeded in destroying his soul." No doubt it is possible that the savage has arrived at his theory of animal immortality by some such process of reasoning, but the supposition seems at least more far-fetched and improbable than in the case of human immortality. And if we admit the insufficiency of the explanation in the one case, we seem bound to admit it, though perhaps in a less degree, in the other case also. In short, we conclude that the theory of dreams appears to be hardly enough by itself to account for the widespread belief in the immortality of men and animals. Dreams have probably done much to confirm that belief, but would they suffice to originate it? We may reasonably doubt it. Apparently, the savage conceives life as an indestructible form of energy. Accordingly, we are driven to cast about for some more adequate explanation of this prevalent and deeply rooted persuasion. In search of such an explanation, perhaps, we need to go no further than the sense of life which every man feels in his own breast. We have seen that to the savage death presents itself not as a natural necessity, but as a lamentable accident or crime that cuts short of existence which, but for it, might have lasted forever. Thus arguing apparently from his own sensations, he conceives of life as an indestructible kind of energy, which when it disappears in one form must necessarily reappear in another, though in the new form it needs not be immediately perceptible by us. In other words, he infers that death does not destroy the vital principle, nor even the conscious personality, but that it merely transforms both of them into other shapes, which are not the less real, because they commonly elude the evidence of our senses. Analogy of the conception to the modern scientific conception of the conservation of energy. If I am right in thus interpreting the thought of primitive man, the savage view of the nature of life singularly resembles the modern scientific doctrine of the conservation of energy. According to that doctrine, no material energy ever perishes or is even diminished. When it seems to suffer diminution or extinction, all that happens is that a portion of the whole of it has been transmuted into other shapes, which, though qualitatively different from, are quantitatively equivalent to, the energy in its original form. In short, if we listen to science, nothing in the physical world is ever lost, but all things are perpetually changing. The sum of energy in the universe is constant and invariable, though it undergoes ceaseless transformations. A similar theory of the indestructibility of energy is implicitly applied by the savage to explain the phenomena of life and death, and logically enough, it does not limit the application to human beings but extends it to the lower animals. Therein he shows himself a better reasoner than his civilized brother, who calmly embraces with avidity the doctrine of human immortality, but rejects with scorn, as derogatory to human dignity, the idea that animals have immortal souls. And when he attempts to confirm his own cherished belief in a life after death by appealing to similar beliefs among savages, and inferring from them a natural instinct of immortality, it is well to remind him that, if he stands by that appeal, he must, like the savage, consistently extend the privilege of immortality to the despised lower animals. For surely it is improper for him to pick and choose his evidence so as to suit his prepossessions, accepting those parts of the savage creed which tally with his own, and rejecting those which do not. On logical and scientific grounds, he seems bound to believe either more or less. He must hold that men and animals are alike immortal, or that neither of them is so. The resurrection of the body in tales and legends. We have seen that many savages look forward to a joyful resurrection of men and beasts, if only a proper care is taken of their skeletons. The same old bones, they imagine, will do duty over again in the next life, when they have been decently clad in a new garment of flesh. This quaint fancy is reflected in many popular tales. Not uncommonly the animal or man in the story comes to life lame of a limb because one of his bones has been eaten, broken, or lost. In a Magyar tale, the hero is cut in pieces, but the Serpent King lays the bones together in their proper order and washes them with water, whereupon the hero revives. His shoulder blade, however, has been lost, so the Serpent King supplies its place with one of gold and ivory. Such stories as Mannhardt has seen explain why Pythagoras, who claimed to have lived many lives, one after the other, was said to have exhibited his golden leg as a proof of his supernatural pretensions. Doubtless he explained that, at one of his resurrections, a leg had been broken or mislaid, and that he had replaced it, like Miss Kilmansegg, with one of gold. Similarly, when the murdered Pelops was restored to life, the shoulder which Demeter had eaten was made good with one of ivory, which was publicly exhibited at Elis down to historical times. The story that one of the members of the mangled Osiris was eaten by fish, and that when Isis collected his scattered limbs, she replaced the missing member with one of wood, may perhaps belong to the same circle of beliefs. The sinew of the thigh regularly cut out and thrown away by some American Indians. There is a certain rule observed by savage hunters and fishers, which, enigmatical at first sight, may possibly be explained by this savage belief in resurrection. A traveller in America in the early part of the 19th century was told by a half-breed Choctaw that the Indians had an obscure story, somewhat resembling that of Jake wrestling with an angel, that the full-blooded Indians always separate the sinew which shrank, and that it is never seen in the Venetian exposed for sale. He did not know what they did with it. His older brother, whom I afterwards met, told me that they eat it as a remedy, but I have also heard, though on less respectable authority, that they refrain from it, like the ancient Jews. A gentleman who had lived on the Indian frontier or in the nation for 10 or 15 years told me that he had often been surprised that the Indians always detached this sinew, but it never occurred to him to inquire the reason. James Adair, who knew the Indians of the southeastern states intimately, and whose absurd theories appear not to have distorted his view of the facts, observes that when in the woods the Indians cut a small piece out of the lower part of the thighs of the deer they kill, lengthways and pretty deep. Among the great number of Venetian hams they bring to our trading houses, I do not remember to have observed one without it. And I have been assured by a gentleman of character, who is now an inhabitant of South Carolina, and well acquainted with the customs of the northern Indians, that they also cut a piece out of the thigh of every deer they kill and throw it away, and reckon it such a dangerous pollution to eat it as to occasion sickness and other misfortunes of sundry kinds, especially by spoiling their guns from shooting with proper force and direction. Story told by the Indians to explain the custom. In more recent times, the statement of Adair's informant has been confirmed by a French missionary, who has also published the obscure story to which the English traveller Hodgson refers. The Velchoos and hare-skin Indians, who roam the bleak steppes and forests that stretch from Hudson's Bay to the Rocky Mountains and northward to the frozen sea, are forbidden by custom to eat the sinew of the legs of animals. To explain this custom they tell the following sacred story. Once upon a time a man found a burrow of porcupines, and going down into it after the porcupines, he lost his way in the darkness, till a kind giant called, "He who sees before and behind," released him by cleaving open the earth. So the man, whose name was Fireless and Homeless, lived with the kind giant, and the giant hunted clans and beavers for him, and carried him about in the sheath of his flint knife. "But know, my son," said the giant, "that he who uses the sky as his head is angry with me, and has sworn my destruction. If he slays me, the clouds will be tinged with my blood. They will be red with it, probably." Then he gave the man an axe made of the tooth of a gigantic beaver, and went forth to meet his foe. But from under the ice the man heard a dull, muffled sound. It was a whale which was making this noise because it was naked and cold. Warned by the man, the giant went towards the whale, which took human shape, and rushed upon the giant. It was the wicked giant, the kind giant's enemy. The two struggled together for a long time, till the kind giant cried, "Oh, my son, cut the sinew of the leg." The man cut the sinew, and the wicked giant fell down and was slain. That is why the Indians do not eat the sinew of the leg. Afterwards, one day the sky suddenly flashed a fiery red, so Fireless and Homeless knew that the kind giant was no more, and he wept. The custom of cutting out the sinew of the thigh in animals seems to be based on the principle of sympathetic magic. This myth, it is almost needless to observe, does not really explain the custom. People do not usually observe a custom because, on a particular occasion, a mythical being is said to have acted in a certain way. But on the contrary, they very often invent myths to explain why they practice certain customs. Dismissing, therefore, the story of Fireless and Homeless, as a myth invented to explain why the Indians abstained from eating a particular sinew. It may be suggested that the original reason for observing the custom was a belief that the sinew in question was necessary to reproduction, and that deprived of it, the slain animals could not come to life again and stock the steppes and prairies, either of the present world or of the spirit land. We have seen that the resurrection of animals is a common article of savage faith, and when the Lapps bury the skeleton of the male bear, in the hope of its resurrection, they are careful to bury the genital parts along with it. However, subsequent inquiries make it probable that the Indian practice of cutting out the hamstring of deer has no other object than that of preventing eaters of venison from going lame. Among the Cherokee, we are told, on killing the deer, the hunter always makes an incision in the hind quarter and removes the hamstring, because this tendon, when severed, draws up into the flesh. Ergo, anyone who should unfortunately partake of the hamstring would find his limbs drawn up in the same manner. Thus, superstition seems to rest on the common principle of homeopathic or imitative magic, that the eater infects himself with the qualities of the animal of whose flesh he partakes. Many instances of the application of that principle have met us already. Some hunters hamstring the dead game in order to lame the ghosts of the animals. But some hunters hamstring the game for a different purpose. They hope thereby to prevent the dead beast or its ghost from getting up and running away. This is the motive alleged for the practice by Kui hunters in Laos. They think that the spells which they utter in the chase may lose their magical virtue, and that the slaughtered animal may consequently come to life again and escape. To prevent that catastrophe, they therefore hamstring the beast as soon as they have butchered it. When an Eskimo of Alaska has killed a fox, he carefully cuts the tendons of all the animal's legs in order to prevent the ghost from reanimating the body and walking about. Some savages put out the eyes of dead game in order to perhaps blind the ghosts of the animals. But hamstringing the carcass is not the only measure which the prudent savage adopts for the sake of disabling the ghost of his victim. In old days, when the Aino went out hunting and killed a fox first, they took care to tie its mouth up tightly in order to prevent the ghost of the animal from sallying forth and warning its fellows against the approach of the hunter. The Gilaks of the Emerald River put out the eyes of the seals they have killed, lest the ghosts of the slain animals should know their slayers and avenge their death by spoiling the seal hunt. The custom of putting out the eyes of slaughtered animals appears to be not uncommon among primitive peoples, and we may suspect that even where a different reason is alleged for it, the true original motive was to blind the dangerous ghost of the injured creature, and so to incapacitate it for retaliating on the slayer. Thus, when a Samoyed has killed a wild reindeer, one of the first things he does is to cut out the eyes and throw them away, in order to ensure a good bag in future. And he buries the eyes in some place where no woman or adult girl is likely to step over them, since that also would spoil his luck in the chase. Among the tribes of Southeast Africa, hunters pluck out the right eye of any animal they have killed and pour a charmed medicine into the empty socket. Among the Thompson Indians of British Columbia, a man whose daughter has just arrived at puberty may not hunt or trap for a month, or he will have no luck. Moreover, he should cut off the head of the first grouse he snares, pluck out the eyes, and insert 2 small roots of the Zacadinus elegans, Perch, in the orbits and another in its mouth, and having done so he ought to hang up the bird's head above his pillow. If he neglects these precautions, he will not be able to snare any more grouse or other small game. No doubt the ceremonial pollution contracted by his daughter at this critical period of her life is supposed to infect the hunter and render him unacceptable to the game. Hence it seems a mere elementary dictate of prudence to hoodwink the grouse effectually by putting out their eyes. Sometimes perhaps the cutting out of the eyes by fierce and powerful animals may be a rational, not a superstitious precaution. Thus the Kamtchatkans, who stabbed with knives the eyes of slain bears before they cut the carcass up, allege as their reason for doing so that bears which seem to be dead of their wounds will sometimes revive and kill their would-be killers. The custom of cutting out the tongues of dead animals may sometimes be intended to prevent their ghosts from telling tales. It appears to be a common custom with savage hunters to cut out the tongues of the animals which they kill, On the analogy of the foregoing customs, we may conjecture that the removal of the tongues is sometimes a precaution to prevent the ghosts of the creatures from telling their sad fate to their sympathizing comrades, the living animals of the same sort, who would naturally be frightened and so keep out of the hunter's way. Thus, for example, Omaha hunters remove the tongue of a slain buffalo through an opening made in the animal's throat. The tongues thus removed are sacred and may not touch any tool or metal, except when they are boiling in the kettles at the sacred tent. Then they are eaten as sacred food. Indian bear hunters cut out what they call the bear's little tongue, a fleshy mass under the real tongue, and keep it for good luck in hunting, or burn it to determine from its crackling and so on whether the soul of the slain bear is angry with them or not. In folk tales, the hero commonly cuts out the tongue of the wild beast which he has slain and preserves it as a token. The incident serves to show that the custom was a common one, since folk tales reflect with accuracy the customs and beliefs of a primitive age. Tongues of animals cut out in order to confer superhuman knowledge or power on their possessors. On the other hand, the tongues of certain animals, as the otter and the eagle, are torn out and sometimes worn round the necks by Tlingit and Haida shamans as a means of conferring superhuman knowledge and power on their possessors. In particular, an otter's tongue is supposed to convey a knowledge of the language of all inanimate objects, of birds, animals, and other living creatures to the shaman, who wears it in a little bag hung round his neck. When a Gala priest sacrifices an animal and decides that the omens are favourable, he cuts out the tongue, sticks his thumb through it, and so flays the animal. In certain cases, Galas cut out the tongues of oxen and wear them on their heads as tokens. In Bohemia, a fox's tongue is worn as an amulet to make a timid person bold. In Oldenburg and Belgium, it is a remedy for erysipelas. In Bohemia, the tongue of a male snake, if cut from the living animal on St. George's Eve and placed under a person's tongue, will confer the gift of eloquence. The Homeric Greeks cut out the tongues of sacrificial victims and burned them. According to some accounts, the tongues of the victims were assigned by the Greeks to Hermes as a god of speech, or to his human representatives, the heralds. On the principles of sympathetic magic, we might expect that heralds should taste the tongues of sacrificial victims to strengthen their voices, or to acquire the gift of tongues. Bechuana custom of mutilating a sacrificial ox in order to inflict corresponding mutilations on the enemy. The conjecture that the practice of cutting out the tongues of dead animals may sometimes be a precaution to prevent their ghosts from telling tales is to some extent confirmed by a ceremony which the Bechuanas used to observe after a battle. It was customary with them on these occasions to sacrifice a fine black ox, called the expiatory victim, Bequel, cut off the tip of its tongue, and extract one of the eyes together with a piece of the hamstring and a piece of the principal tendon on the shoulder, and the severed parts were afterwards carefully fried, along with some medicinal herbs, in a horn by a medicine man. The reasons for thus mutilating the animal were explained by a native to 2 French missionaries. "If we cut out and purify the victim's tongue," said he, "the motive is to induce the guardian deities to prevent the enemy from speaking ill of us. We ask also that the sinews of their feet and hands may fail them in the battle, and that their eyes may not cast a covetous look on our herds." In this custom, the sacrificial ox appears to be treated as a ceremonial equivalent of the enemy. Accordingly, by cutting out its tongue, you obviously prevent your enemy from cursing you, for how can he curse you if he has no tongue? Similarly, by hamstringing the beast, you ensure that the legs and arms of your adversary will fail him in the battle, and by gouging out the ox's eye, you make perfectly certain that the foe will never be able to cast a longing eye on your fat beeves. Mutilation of the corpses of enemies or other dangerous persons for the purpose of maintaining their ghosts. Thus, for all practical purposes, the mutilation of the ox is quite as effective as a mutilation of the enemy's dead, which is sometimes practiced by savages from similar superstitious motives. For example, on the return from a field of battle, the Baganda used to cut up 1 or 2 of the enemy's dead, scoop out the eyes, cut off the ears, and lay the limbs on the road taken by the returning army, to prevent evil following them. The nature of the evil which the Baganda warriors feared to incur if they did not mutilate the dead in this fashion is not mentioned. But we may conjecture that by gouging out the eyes and ears of their slain foes, they hoped to make their angry ghosts blind and deaf. Or perhaps, upon the principles of homeopathic magic, they counted on maiming their living foes in like manner. Disabling the ghost by mutilating his dead body. Some of the Aborigines of Australia cut off the thumbs of their dead enemies in order that their ghosts may not be able to throw spears. Other Australian tribes burn off the thumb nails of their own dead to prevent the poor ghost from scratching a way for himself out of the grave. When the Tupi Indians of Brazil killed a native prisoner, the thumb was cut off because it was used in archery, an art concerning which they were singularly superstitious. What was done with it does not appear, except that it was not eaten like the rest. Perhaps these Indians, like the Australians, thought by this mutilation to disarm the dangerous ghost of their victim. When any bad man died, the Eskimos of Bering Strait used to cut the sinews of his arms and legs, in order to prevent the shade from returning to the body and causing it to walk at night as a ghoul. In Travancore, the ghosts of men who have been hanged for murder are particularly dreaded, so in order to incapacitate them from roaming about and attacking people, it used to be customary to slice off a criminal's heels with a sword or hamstring him at the moment when he swung free from the ladder. The Omaha Indians used to slit the souls of a man who had been killed by lightning in order to prevent his ghost from walking. Among the Awemba of northern Rhodesia, murderers often inflicted shocking mutilations on the bodies of their victims. This was done, it is said, to prevent the spirit of the murdered person from exacting vengeance, and even if only the joint of the first or the little finger were cut off, such mutilation would suffice for this purpose. These examples suggest that many other mutilations which savages practiced on their dead enemies may spring not from the blind fury of hatred, but from a cool calculation of the best mode of protecting themselves against the very natural resentment of the ghosts. By mutilating the corpse, they apparently hoped to maim the ghost, and so to render him incapable of harming them. At all events, it appears that in certain circumstances, some savages treat the dead bodies of men and beasts much alike, by hamstringing them in order to prevent their ghosts from getting up and walking. So consistent and impartial is the primitive philosopher in his attitude to the spirit world. End of section 10. Section 11 of The Golden Bough, A Study in Magic and Religion. Part 5, The Spirits of the Corn and of the Wild. Volume 2, by Sir James George Frazer. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recorded by Leon Harvey. Chapter 15. The Propitation of Vermin by Farmers. 1. The Enemies of the Crops. Propitation of the vermin which infest crops and cattle in Europe. Besides the animals which primitive man dreads for their strength and ferocity, and those which he reveres on account of the benefits which he expects from them, there is another class of creatures which he sometimes deems it necessary to conciliate by worship and sacrifice. These are the vermin that infest his crops and his cattle. To rid himself of these deadly foes, the farmer has recourse to many superstitious devices, of which, though some are meant to destroy or intimidate the vermin, others aim in propitiating them, and persuading them by fair means to spare the fruits of the earth and the herds. Thus, Estonian peasants in the island of Ossel stand in great awe of the weevil, an insect which is exceedingly destructive to the grain. They give it a fine name, and if a child is about to kill a weevil, they say, "Don't do it. The more we hurt him, the more he hurts us." If they find a weevil, they bury it in the earth instead of killing it. Some even put the weevil under a stone in the field and offer corn to it. They think that thus it is at peace and does less harm. Amongst the Saxons of Transylvania, in order to keep sparrows from the corn, the sower begins by throwing the first handful of seed backwards over his head, saying, "That is for you, sparrows." To guard the corn against the attacks of leaf flies, Erdforhe, he shuts his eyes and scatters 3 handfuls of oats in different directions. Having made this offering to the leaf flies, he feels sure that they will spare the corn. A Transylvanian's way of securing the crops against all birds, beasts, and insects is this. After he has finished sowing, the sower goes once more from end to end of the field, imitating the gesture of sowing, but with an empty hand. As he does so, he says, "I sow this for the animals. I sow it for everything that flies and creeps, that walks and stands, that sings and springs, in the name of God the Father," etc. The Huzals of the Carpathians believe that the bite of the weasel is poisonous, and that the animal commits ravages on the cattle. Yet they take care never to kill a weasel, lest the surviving kinsfolk of the deceased should avenge his death on the herds of his murderer. They even celebrate a festival of weasels either on St. Matthew's Day, 9th August Old Style, 21st August New Style, or on St. Catherine's Day, 24th November Old Style, 6th December New Style. On that day no work may be done, lest the weasels should harm the herds. The following is a German way of freeing a garden from caterpillars. After sunset or at midnight, the mistress of the house, or another female member of the family, walks all round the garden dragging a broom after her. She must not look behind her, and must keep murmuring, "Good evening, Mother Caterpillar. You shall come with your husband to church." The garden gate is left open till the following morning. Similar attempts made to propitiate vermin by savages. The attempts thus made by European peasants to mollify the rage and avert the ravages of vermin have their counterpart in the similar observances of savages. When the Matabele find caterpillars in their fields, they put an ear of corn in a calabash, fill the vessel up with caterpillars, and set it down on a path leading to another village, hoping thus to induce the insects to migrate thither. The Yabim of German New Guinea imagine that the caterpillars and worms which infest their fields of taro are animated by the souls of the human dead. Hence, in order to rid the crops of these vermin, they politely request the insects to leave the fields and repair to the village. "Ye locusts, worms, and caterpillars," they say, "who have died or hanged yourselves, or have been killed by a falling log or devoured by a shark, go into the village. There is a certain ant whose destructive ravages are dreaded by the people of Nias." Generally they wage war on it by means of traps and other devices, but at the time of the rice harvest they cease to call the insect by its common name and refer to it under the title of Sibeya, a good spirit who is supposed to protect the crop from harm. In South Mirzapur, when locusts threaten to eat up the fruits of the earth, the people catch one, decorate his head with a spot of red lean salam to him, and let him go. After these civilities he immediately departs, along with his fellows. Among the Wajaga of German East Africa, sorcerers attempt to rid the fields of locusts by catching one of the insects, tying its legs together, and letting it fly away, after charging the creature to lead the swarm to the lands of a neighbouring and hostile chief. The Wagogo, another tribe of German East Africa, catch one of the birds which infest their gardens, and having drenched it with their charmed stuff, they release the bird in the hope that it may entice all its companions away into the forest. Sometimes in dealing with vermin, the farmer aims at a jealous mean between undue severity and weak indulgence. Sometimes in dealing with vermin, the farmer aims at hitting a happy mean between excessive vigour on the one hand and weak indulgence on the other. Kind but firm, he tempers severity with mercy. An ancient Greek treatise on farming advises the husbandman who would rid his lands of mice to act thus. Take a sheet of paper and write on it as follows: "I adjure you, ye mice here present, that ye neither injure me nor suffer another mouse to do so. I give you yonder field." Here you specify the field. "But if I ever catch you here again, by the mother of the gods I will rend you in 7 pieces. Write this and stick the paper on an unhewn stone in the field before sunrise, taking care to keep the written side up. In the Ardennes they say that to get rid of rats you should repeat the following words: Erat verbum apud deum vestrum. Male rats and female rats, I conjure you, by the great God, to go out of my house, out of all my habitations, and to betake yourselves to such and such a place, to end your days. Decritus veracis et desmin beracis, virgo potens, clemens, justitiae. Then write the same words on pieces of paper, fold them up, and place one of them under the door by which the rats are to go forth, and the other on the road which they are to take. This exorcism should be performed at sunrise. Some years ago, an American farmer was reported to have written a civil letter to the rats, telling them that his crops were short, that he could not afford to keep them through the winter, that he had been very kind to them, and that for their own good, he thought they had better leave him and go to some of his neighbours who had more grain. This document he pinned to a post in his barn for the rats to read. The mouse is one of the most dreaded enemies of the rice crop and celebes. Many, therefore, are the prayers and incantations which prudent farmers resort to for the purpose of keeping the vermin from their fields. Thus, for example, a man will run round his field saying, "Pruner is your name. Creep not through my rice. Be blind and deaf. Creep not through my rice. If you must creep through the rice, go and creep through other rice." The following formula is equally effective. Pruner is your real name. Mouse is your by-name. Down in the evening land is the stone on which you ought to sit. In the west, in Java, is your abode. Or again, O long tail, eat not my rice. It is the rice of a prince. It is the field of one who is revered. The Aino of Japan believe that God first created rats and mice at Eram Kotan, which means rat place. Indeed, there are a great many rats and mice there even now, and the people of the village worship mice and offer them libations and sacred sticks whittled at the top into shavings. Grateful for these attentions, the mice spare the gardens and will not nibble at the roots and the fruits. But if the people omit to worship the mice, or if they are rash enough to speak evil of them, the creatures are angry and eat up the garden produce. The havoc which rats and mice now work in the garden of the Aino every year is attributed to the modern neglect of the people to worship the vermin. Sometimes a few of the vermin are treated with high distinction, whilst the rest are pursued with relentless vigour. Sometimes the desired object is supposed to be attained by treating with high distinction one or two chosen individuals of the obnoxious species, while the rest are pursued with relentless vigour. In the East Indian island of Bali, the mice which ravage the rice fields are caught in great numbers and burned in the same way that corpses are burned. But 2 of the captured mice are allowed to live and receive a little packet of white linen. Then the people bow down before them, as before gods, and let them go. In the Cangian archipelago, East Indies, when the mice prove very destructive to the rice crop, the people rid themselves of the pest in the following manner. On a Friday, when the usual service in the mosque is over, 4 pairs of mice are solemnly united in marriage by the priest. Each pair is then shut up in a miniature canoe about a foot long. These canoes are filled with rice and other fruits of the earth, and the 4 pairs of mice are then escorted to the seashore just as if it were a real wedding. Wherever the procession passes, the people beat with all their might on the rice blocks. On reaching the shore, the canoes, with their little inmates, are launched and left to the mercy of the winds and waves. When the farms of the sea dyaks or ibans of Sarawak are much pestered by birds and insects, they catch a specimen of each kind of vermin, 1 sparrow, 1 grasshopper, and so on, put them in a tiny boat of bark well stocked with provisions, and then allow the little vessel with its obnoxious passengers to float down the river. If that does not drive the pests away, the dyaks resort to what they deem a more effectual mode of accomplishing the same purpose. They make a clay crocodile as large as life and set it up in the fields, where they offer it food, rice spirit and cloth, and sacrifice a fowl and a pig before it. Mollified by these attentions, the ferocious animal very soon gobbles up all the creatures that devour the crops. In some parts of Bohemia, the peasant, though he kills field mice and grey mice without scruple, always spares white mice. If he finds a white mouse, he takes it up carefully and makes a comfortable bed for it in the window. For if it died, the luck of the house would be gone, and the grey mice would multiply fearfully in the dwelling. Mock lamentations of women for insects which destroy the crops. In Albania, if the fields or vineyards are ravaged by locusts or beetles, some of the women will assemble with dishevelled hair, catch a few of the insects, and march with them in a funeral procession to a spring or stream, in which they drown the creatures. Then one of the women sings, O locusts and beetles who have left us bereaved, and the dirge is taken up and repeated by all the women in chorus. Thus, by celebrating the obsequies of a few locusts and beetles, they hope to bring about the death of them all. When caterpillars invaded a vineyard or field in Syria, the virgins were gathered, and one of the caterpillars was taken, and a girl made its mother. Then they bewailed and buried it. Thereafter they conducted the mother to the place where the caterpillars were, consoling her, in order that all the caterpillars might leave the garden. On the 1st of September, Russian girls make small coffins of turnips and other vegetables, enclose flies and other insects in them, and then bury them with a great show of mourning. In South Africa, a plague of caterpillars is removed by a number of small Catholic girls who go singing through the fields. They wail as they pass through the languishing crops, and thus invoke the pity of some ancestral spirits. The mournful rite ends with a dance on a plot of ground overlooking the fields. Ceremony performed by Baronga women to drive insects from the crops. On the shore of Delagoa Bay, there thrives a small brown beetle which is very destructive to the beans and maize. The Baronga call it Nunu. In December or January, when the insects begin to swarm, women are sent to collect them from the beanstalks in shells. When they have done so, a twin girl is charged with the duty of throwing the insects into a neighbouring lake. Accompanied by a woman of mature years, and carrying the beetles in a calabash, the girl goes on her mission without saying a word to anyone. At her back march the whole troop of women, their arms, waists, and heads covered with grass, and holding in their hands branches of manioc with large leaves, which they wave to and fro, while they chant the words, "Nunu, go away, leave our fields! Nunu, go away, leave our fields!" The little girl throws her calabash with the beetles into the water without looking behind her, and thereupon the women bellow out obscene songs, which they never dare to utter except on this occasion and at the ceremony for making rain. Images made of vermin as a charm to get rid of them. Another mode of getting rid of vermin and other noxious creatures without hurting their feelings or showing them disrespect is to make images of them. Apollonius of Tyana is said to have cleared Antioch of scorpions by making a bronze image of a scorpion and burying it under a small pillar in the middle of the city. Further, it is reported that he freed Constantinople from flies by means of a bronze fly, and from gnats by means of a bronze gnat. In the Middle Ages, Virgil passed for an enchanter, and is said to have rid Naples of flies and grasshoppers by bronze or copper images of these insects, and when the waters of the city were infested by leeches, he made a golden leech, which put a stop to the plague. It is reported that a mosque at Fez used to be protected against scorpions by an image of a bird holding a scorpion in its beak. An Arab writer tells of a golden locust which guarded a certain town from a plague of locusts, and he also mentions 2 brazen oxen which checked a murrain among cattle. Gregory of Tours tells us that the city of Paris used to be free of dormice and serpents, but that in his lifetime, while they were cleaning a sewer, they found a bronze serpent and a bronze dormouse and removed them. Since then, adds the good bishop, dormice and serpents without number have been seen in Paris. When their land was overrun with mice, the Philistines made golden images of the vermin and sent them out of the country in a new cart drawn by 2 cows, hoping that the real mice would simultaneously depart. So when a swarm of serpents afflicted the Israelites in the desert, they made a serpent of brass and set it on a pole as a mode of staying the plague. 2. Mouse Apollo and Wolf Apollo. Greek gods who took titles from vermin. Some of the Greek gods were worshipped under titles derived from the vermin or other pests which they were supposed to avert or exterminate. Thus we hear of Mouse Apollo, Locust Apollo, and Mildew Apollo, of Locust Hercules and Worm-killing Hercules, of Foxy Dionysus, and of Zeus the fly-catcher or averter of flies. If we could trace all these and similar worships to their origin, we should probably find that they were at first addressed not to the high gods as the protectors of mankind, but to the baleful things themselves, the mice, locusts, mildew, and so forth, with the intention of flattering and soothing them, of disarming their malignity, and of persuading them to spare their worshippers. We know that the Romans worshipped the mildew, the farmer's plague under its own proper name. Mouse, Simitheus Apollo. The ravages committed by mice among the crops, both in ancient and modern times, are notorious, and according to a tradition which may be substantially correct, the worship of the mouse, Simitheus Apollo, was instituted to avert them. The image of a mouse which stood beside Apollo's tripod in the god's temple in the Troad may be compared with the golden mice, which the Philistines made for the purpose of ridding themselves of the vermin, and the tame mice kept in his sanctuary, together with the white mice which lived under the altar, would, on this hypothesis, be parallel to the white mice which the Bohemian peasant still cherishes as the best way of keeping down the number of their grey-coated brethren. An oriental counterpart to the mouse Apollo is the ancient pillar or rude idol which the Chams of Indochina call Yang Tikuri, or god rat, and to which they offer sacrifices whenever rats infest their fields in excessive numbers. Wolfish Apollo. Another epithet applied to Apollo which probably admits of a similar explanation is wolfish. Various legends set forth how the god received the title of wolfish because he exterminated wolves. Indeed, this function was definitely attributed to him by the epithet wolf-slayer. Arguing from the analogy of the preceding cases, we may suppose that at first the wolves themselves were propitiated by fair words and sacrifices to induce them to spare man and beast, and that at a later time, when the Greeks, or rather the enlightened portion of them, had outgrown this rude form of worship, they transferred the duty of keeping off the wolves to a beneficent deity, who discharged the same useful office for the pests, such as mice, locusts, and mildew. A reminiscence of the direct propitiation of the fierce and dangerous beasts themselves is preserved in the legends told to explain the origin of the Lyceum, or place of wolves at Athens, and of the sanctuary of wolfish Apollo at XVII. It is said that once, when Athens was infested by wolves, Apollo commanded sacrifices to be offered on the place of wolves, and the smell proved fatal to the animals. Similarly, at XVII, when the flocks suffered heavily from the ravages of wolves, the same god directed the shepherds to set forth meat mixed with a certain bark, and the wolves devoured the tainted meat and perished. These legends probably reflect, in a distorted form, an old custom of sacrificing to the wolves. In other words, of feeding them to mollify their ferocity and win their favour. We know that such a custom prevailed among the Lets down to comparatively recent times. In the month of December, about Christmas time, they sacrificed a goat to the wolves, with strange idolatrous rites, at a crossroad, for the purpose of inducing the wolves to spare the flocks and herds. After offering the sacrifice, they used to brag that no beast of theirs would fall a victim to the ravening maw of a wolf for all the rest of that year. No, not though the pack were to run right through the herd. Sacrifices of this sort are reported to have been secretly offered by the Lets as late the 17th century, and if we know more of peasant life in ancient Greece, we might find that on winter days, while Aristotle was expounding his philosophy in the Lyceum, or place of wolves at Athens, the Attic peasant was still carrying forth, in the crispy frosty air, his offering to the wolves, which all night long had been howling round his sheepfold in a snowy glen of Parnes, or Bantilicus. End of section 11. Section 12 of The Golden Bough, A Study in Magic and Religion. Part 5, Spirits of the Corn Out of the Wild. Volume 2. By Sir James George Frazer. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recorded by Leon Harvey. Chapter 16. The Transmigration of Human Souls into Animals. Many savages spare certain animals because they believe the souls of their dead to be lodged in them. Examples of this belief among the American Indians. With many savages, a reason for respecting and sparing certain species of animals is a belief that the souls of their dead kinsfolk are lodged in these creatures. Thus the Indians of Cheyenne refuse to eat certain large fish, because they say that the soul of some one of their relations might be in the fish, and that hence in eating the fish they might swallow the soul. The Pieroras Indians of the Orinoco believe that the tapir is their ancestor, and that the souls that die and transmigrate into animals of that species. Hence they will never hunt the tapir, nor eat its flesh. It may even ravage their crops with impunity. They will not attempt to ward it off or scare it away. The Canaloas, or Indians, of Ecuador also believe in the transmigration of souls. It is especially under the form of jaguars that they expect to be born again. Hence they refuse to attack a jaguar except by way of righteous retribution for some wrong he has done them. The doctrine of transmigration finds favour also with the Quixos Indians. An old man told the Indian traveller Osculati that the soul is a breath which passes from the human body into an animal, and on the death of the animal shifts its quarters to another body. The Kangua Indians of Paraguay think that the souls of the dead which are unable to depart this earth are born again in the shape of animals. For that reason, many of them refuse to eat the flesh of the domestic pig, because they say he was a man. Once when a Spaniard was out hunting with two Pieros Indians of Peru, they passed a deserted house in which they saw a fine jaguar. The Indians drew the Spaniard away, and when he asked why they did not attack the animal, they say, "It was our sister. She died at the last rains. We abandoned the hut, and on the second night she came back. It was a beautiful jaguar." Similarly, a missionary remarked of the Chiricanos Indians of Bolivia that they must have some idea of the transmigration of souls. For one day, while he was talking with a woman of the tribe who had left her daughter in a neighbouring village, she started at sight of a fox passing near and exclaimed, "May it not be the soul of my daughter who has died?" The Colombian Indians in the district of Popayan will not kill the deer of their forests, and entertain such a respect for these animals that they view with horror and indignation anyone who dares to eat venison in their presence. They say that the souls of persons who have led a good life are in the deer. In like manner, the Indians of California formerly refused to eat the flesh of large game, because they held that the bodies of all large animals contained the souls of past generations of men and women. However, the Indians who were maintained at the Spanish missions and received their rations in the form of beef had to overcome their conscientious scruples in regard to cattle. Once a half-caste, wishing to amuse himself at the expense of the devout, cooked a dish of bear's flesh for them and told them it was beef. They ate heartily of it, but when they learned the trick that had been played on them, they were seized with retchings, which only ended with the reappearance of the obnoxious meat. A reproach hurled by the wild tribes of their brethren who had fallen under European influence was, "They eat venison." Californian Indians have been known to plead for the life of an old grizzly she-bear because they thought it housed the soul of a dead grandam, whose withered features had borne some likeness to the wrinkled face of the bear. Belief of the transmigration of human souls into animals in Africa. The doctrine of the transmigration of human souls into animal bodies is viewed with great favour by the Negroes of southern Guinea. In different parts of the coast, different species of animals are accounted sacred, because they are supposed to be animated by the spirits of the dead. Hence monkeys near Fishtown, snakes at Whydah, and crocodiles near Dick's Cove live in the odour of sanctity. In the lagoon of Tendo, on the Ivory Coast of West Africa, there is a certain sacred islet, covered with impenetrable scrub, in which no native dare set foot. It is peopled only by countless huge bats, which at evening quit the island by hundreds of thousands to fly towards the river Teno, which flows into the lagoon. The natives say that these bats are the souls of the dead who retire during the day to the Holy Isle and are bound to present themselves every night at the abode of Teno, the great and good fetish who dwells by the river of his name. Paddling past the island, the Negroes will not look at it, but turn away their heads. A European in crossing the lagoon wished to shoot one of the bats, but his boatmen implored him to refrain, lest he should kill the soul of one of their kinsfolk. In the Mopane country of South Africa there is, or used to be, no check on the increase of lions, because the natives, believing that the souls of their chiefs entered into the animals, never attempted to kill them. On the contrary, whenever they met a lion they saluted him in the usual fashion by clapping their hands. Hence the country was so infested by lions that people, benighted in fields, often slept for safety in trees. Similarly, the Makanga, who occupy the angle between the Zambezi and Shire rivers, refrain from killing lions because they believe that the spirits of dead chiefs enter into them. The Amambwe universally suppose that their reigning chief turns at death into a lion. The Bahima of Ankole in Central Africa also imagine that their dead kings are changed into lions. Their corpses are carried to a forest called Nsazi, where they lie in state for several days. At the end of that time, the body is supposed to burst and give forth a lion cub, which contains the spirit of the deceased king. The animal is nurtured by priests till it is grown up, when it is released and allowed to roam the forest with the other lions. It is the duty of the priest to feed and care for the lions and to hold communications with the dead kings when occasion arises. For that purpose, the priests always live in a temple in the forest, where they receive frequent offerings of cattle for the lions. In this forest the lions are sacred and may not be killed, but in other parts of the country they may be slaughtered with impunity. Similarly, the Bahima think that at death the king's wives are changed into leopards. The transformation takes place in a like manner through the bursting of the dead bodies in a belt of the same sacred forest. There the leopards are daily fed with offerings of meat by priests, whose office is hereditary. Further, the Bahima are of opinion that the spirits of dead princes and princesses come to life again in the form of snakes, which burst from their dead bodies in another belt of the same forest. There is a temple in the forest where priests feed and guard the holy serpents. When the little snakes have issued from the corpses of the princes, they are fed with milk till they are big enough to go alone. The El Gaborone clan of the Maasai in East Africa imagine that when married men of the clan are buried, their bones turn into serpents. Hence the El Gaborone do not, like the other Maasai, kill snakes. On the contrary, they are glad to see the reptiles in the kraal and set out sources of milk and honey for them on the ground. It is said that snakes never bite members of the clan. The Abubu and other tribes of the Congo region believe that at death their souls transmigrate into the bodies of various animals, such as the hippopotamus, the leopard, the gorilla, and the gazelle, and on no account would a man eat the flesh of an animal of the particular kind which he expects to inhabit the next life. Some of the Caffres of the Zambezi region in Portuguese territory, who believe in the transmigration of human souls into the bodies of animals, judge the species of animals to which a dead person has transmigrated by the resemblance which he bore to it in his life. Thus the soul of a big burly man with prominent teeth will pass into an elephant. A strong man with a long beard will become a lion. An ugly man with a large mouth and thick lips will be a hyena, and so on. Animals supposed to be tainted by the spirits of the dead are treated as sacred and invulnerable. When a Portuguese lady named Dona Maria, to whom the blacks were never attached, had departed this life, it chanced that the hyena came repeatedly by night to the village and carried off pigs and kids. The lady's old slaves would not do the creature the smallest hurt, saying, "It is Dona Maria, our good mistress. She is hungry and comes to her house seeking what she may devour." Belief in the transmigration of human souls into animals in Madagascar. The belief that the souls of the dead transmigrate into the bodies of animals appears to be widely diffused among the tribes of Madagascar. Thus, for example, the souls of the Betsileo are thought after death to be reborn in boa constrictors, crocodiles, and eels of a particular sort according to their rank in life. It is the nobles, or at all events, the most illustrious of them, who have the privilege of turning into boa constrictors at death. To facilitate the transformation, the corpse of a dead noble is strapped to the central pillar of his house, and the products of decomposition are collected in a silver bowl. The largest of the worms, which are bred in the putrid liquid, is believed to contain the soul of the dead nobleman, and to develop in due time into a boa constrictor. Accordingly, these huge serpents are regarded as sacred by the Betsilo. Nobody would dare to kill one of them. The people go down on their knees to them and salute them, just as they would do to a real-life nobleman. It is a happy day when a boa constrictor deigns to visit the village which he formerly inhabited in human form. He receives an ovation from his family. They go forth to meet him, spread silk for him to crawl upon, and carry him off to the public square, where he is allowed to gorge himself with the blood of a sacrificed ox. The souls of commoners of good standing transmigrate into the bodies of crocodiles, and the new form will serve their old masters, particularly by announcing to them the approach of the hour when they must shuffle out of their human frame into the frame of boa constrictors. Lastly, the scum of the population turn at death into eels, and to render the change as easy for them as possible, it is customary to remove the bowels from the corpse and throw them into a sacred lake. The eel that swallows the first mouthful becomes the domicile of the soul of the deceased. No Betselia would eat such eels. Again, the Antankanara, a tribe in the extreme north of Madagascar, believe that the spirits of their dead chiefs pass into crocodiles, while those of common folk are reborn in other animals. Once more, the Tanala, a tribe of southeastern Madagascar, suppose that the souls of their dead transmigrate into certain animals, such as scorpions and insects, which accordingly they will not kill or eat, believing that the creatures will in like manner abstain from injuring them. Belief in the transmigration of human souls into animals in Assam, Burma, and Cochin China. Some of the Nagas of Assam hold that the spirits of the departed, after undergoing a cycle of changes in a subterranean world, are reborn on earth in the form of butterflies or small houseflies, only, however, in that shape to perish forever. Hence, when these small flies light on the wine cups of their living, the Wasaliers will not kill them for the fear of destroying some of their ancestors. For a like reason, the Angamis, one of the Naga tribes, carefully abstain from injuring certain species of butterfly. At Ang Ten, a large village of Upper Burma, the river at a point above a dilapidated bridge swarms with fish, which the people hold sacred because they imagined them to be their dead come to life again in a fishy form. In former days, no one might kill one of these fish under pain of death. Once a Shan, caught fishing with some dead fish in his possession, was instantly haled away and killed. The people of Konmeri, in eastern Cochin China, will not eat toads, because long ago the soul of one of their chiefs passed at death into a toad. In his new shape he appeared to his son in a dream, informed him of the transmigration, and commanded him to sacrifice a pig, a fowl, and millet wine to his deceased parent, assuring him that if he complied with the injunction, the rice would grow well. The dutiful son obeyed the author of his being. The toad appeared in the rice fields watching over the growth of the rice, and the crop was magnificent. For 2 generations the sacrifices were duly offered. The toad appeared at the time of sowing, and the granaries were full. Afterwards, however, the people neglected to sacrifice to the toad, and were punished accordingly by failure of the crops and consequent famine. Some of the Chams of Indochina believe that the souls of the dead inhabit the bodies of certain animals, such as serpents, crocodiles, and so forth, the kind of animal varying with the family. The species of animals most commonly regarded as tenanted by the spirits of the departed are the rodents and active climbing creatures which abound in their country, such as squirrels. According to some people, these small animals are especially the abode of stillborn infants or of children who die young. The souls of these little ones appear in dreams to their mourning parents and say, "I inhabit the body of a squirrel, honour me as such, make me a present of a flower, a coconut, a cup of roasted rice, and so on." The parents discharge this pious duty, respect these familiar spirits, ascribe illnesses to their displeasure, pray to them for healing, and on their deathbed commend to their descendants the care of such and such a spirit as a member of the family. Belief in the transmigration of human souls into animals in the Philippines, the Sandwich Islands, and the Pelew Islands. The Ugorots of Cabugatan in the Philippines regard the eels in their stream as the souls of their forefathers. Hence, instead of catching and eating them, they feed them till the eels become as tame as carp in a pond. In the Sandwich Islands, various people worship diverse kinds of animals, such as fowls, lizards, owls, rats, and so forth. If a man who adorned sharks happened to have a child stillborn, he would endeavour to lure to the souls of the dead infant in the body of a shark. For this purpose he laid the tiny body, together with a couple of roots of taro, some kava, and a piece of sugar cane on a mat, recited prayers over it, and then flung the whole into the sea, believing that by virtue of this offering the transmigration of the child's soul into the shark's body would be effected, and that henceforth the voracious monsters would spare all members of the family who might otherwise be exposed to their attacks. In the temples dedicated to sharks, there were priests who, morning and evening, addressed prayers to the shark idol and rubbed their bodies with water and salt, which, drying on their skin, imparted to it an appearance of being covered with scales. They also wore red stuffs, uttered shrill cries, leaped over the sacred enclosure, and persuaded the credulous islanders that they knew the exact moment when the children thrown into the sea were turned into sharks. For this revelation they were rewarded by their happy parents with a plentiful supply of little pigs, coconuts, kava, and so on. The Pelu Islanders believed that the souls of their forefathers lived in certain species of animals, which accordingly they held sacred and would not injure. For this reason one man would not kill snakes, another would not harm pigeons, and so on, but every one was quite ready to kill and eat the sacred animals of his neighbours. Transmigration of human souls into tigers in Sumatra. We have seen that the Batas of Sumatra seldom kill a tiger, and never without performing an elaborate ceremony to appease the animal's ghost. The reason alleged for treating tigers with this respect is that the souls of the dead often transmigrate into these animals, and therefore, in killing a tiger, a man never knows whether he is not killing a relative of his own. If members of the totemic clan of the tiger should happen to be in a village when the carcass of a slain tiger is brought into it, they are bound to pay special marks of honour to its remains by putting betel in its mouth. A priest offers food and drink to the dead tiger, addresses him as grandfather, prays him not to be angry or frightened, and explains to the gods the reason for putting the animal to death. Belief in the transmigration of human souls into animals in Borneo. The Kayans of Borneo think that when the human soul departs from the body at death, it may take the form of an animal or bird. For example, if a deer were seen browsing near a man's grave, his relations would probably conclude that his soul had assumed the shape of a deer, and the whole family would abstain from eating venison lest they should annoy the deceased. Most of the Kalimantanes, another tribe of Borneo, will kill and eat deer freely, but there are exceptions to the rule. Thus, Damong, the chief of a Malano household, together with all his people, will not kill or eat the deer Cervulus matjak, alleging that an ancestor had become a deer of this kind, and that since they cannot distinguish this incarnation of his ancestor from another deer, they must abstain from killing all deer of this species. We know of one instance in which one of these people refused to use again his cooking pot, which a Malay had borrowed and used for cooking the flesh of this deer. This superstition is still rigidly adhered to, although these people have been converted to Islam of recent years. The people of Miri, who also are Mohammedan Malanaos, claim to be related to the large deer, Cervus equinus, and some of them to the muntjac deer also. Now these people live in a country in which deer of all kinds abound, and they always make a clearing in the jungle around a tomb. On such a clearing, grass grows up rapidly, and so the spot becomes attractive to deer as a grazing ground, and it seems not improbable that it is through frequently seeing deer about the tombs that the people have come to entertain the belief that their dead relatives become deer, or that they are in some other way closely related to the deer. The Bakongs, another group of Malanaos, hold a similar belief with regard to the bear cat, Artictis, and the various species of Paradoxurus. And in this case the origin of the belief is admitted by them to be the fact that, on going for their graveyards, they often see one of these beasts coming out of a tomb. These tombs are roughly constructed wooden coffins, raised a few feet only from the ground, and it is probable that these carnivores make their way into them in the first place to devour the corpse, and that they then make use of them as lairs. Among the Sea Dyaks, also of Borneo, the idea of metempsychosis is not unknown. One of them used to treat a snake with the greatest kindness, because he said it had been revealed to him in a dream that the spirit of his grandfather dwelt in that snake. Belief in the transmigration of human souls into animals in New Guinea. Some of the Papuans on the northern coast of New Guinea also believe in the transmigration of souls. They hold that at death the souls of human beings sometimes pass into animals, such as cassowaries, fish or pigs, and they abstain from eating the animals of the sort at which their spirits of the dead are supposed to have taken up their abode. For example, at Masura in Dutch New Guinea, there are people who imagine that the spirits of their ancestors transmigrated into cassowaries, and accordingly, they will not partake of the flesh of the long-legged bird. In Simbang, a village at the mouth of the Babui River in German New Guinea, there is a family who will not harm crocodiles, not merely because they fear the vengeance of the creatures, but also because they reckon crocodiles their kinsfolk, and expect that they themselves will turn to crocodiles at death. As head of the family, they recognize a certain aged crocodile, everywhere known as Old Butong, who is said to have been born of a woman at Simbang. They think that while they are at work in the fields, and their houses stand empty, their ancestors come forth from the river and repair to the place in the roof where the mysterious bull roarers are kept, which make a humming sound at their initiatory rites of young men. But when the people return from the fields, they find their houses as empty and silent as when they left them. The spirits of their forefathers have plunged into the river again. If a crocodile carries off anybody, the natives are sure that the brute must be a stranger, not one of their own crocodile kinsfolk, who never would do such a thing. And if their neighbours at Yabim are so unfeeling as to kill a crocodile, the Bubui people protest against the outrage and demand satisfaction. Some Yabin people give out that after death their souls will be turned into certain fabulous cave-hunting swine, and accordingly their relatives refuse to spear or to eat the real wild swine. If these animals break into and ravage the fields, their human kinsfolk attempt to appease them with offerings of coconuts and other valuable articles. Similarly, in Tamara, an island off the coast of German New Guinea, the people will not eat pork, because it is their conviction that the souls of the dead transmigrate into the bodies of pigs. The Kai people who inhabit the rugged and densely wooded mountains inland from the Finch Harbour in German New Guinea imagine that the gloomy depths of some wild ravines are haunted by the souls of the dead in the form of cuscuses and other animals. None but the owner has a right to kill game in these dark and awful gullies, and even he must propitiate the soul of every animal that he slays in such a spot. For this purpose he spreads out offerings on the carcass and presents them to the injured spirit, saying, "Take the gifts and leave us the animal that we may eat it." After leaving the articles long enough to allow the soul of the beast to abstract and convey away the souls of other things, the hunter is free to cut up and consume the carcass. Some years ago, when the heavy rains caused a landslip in these wild mountains, and a house with its inmates was buried in the ruins, public opinion in the neighbourhood attributed the disaster to the misconduct of the deceased, who had failed to appease the soul of a boa constrictor slain by them on haunted ground. Belief in the transmigration of human souls into animals in the Solomon Islands. In the Solomon Islands, a man at the point of death would gather the members of his family about him and inform them of the particular sort of creature, say a bird or a butterfly, into which he proposed to transmigrate. Henceforth the family would regard that species of animal as sacred, and would neither kill nor injure it. If they fell in with a creature of the kind, it might be a bird or a butterfly, they would say, "That is Papa," and offer him a coconut. In these islands, sharks are very often supposed to be ghosts, for dying people frequently announce their intention of being sharks when they have put off their human shape. After that, if any shark, remarkable for its size or colour, is seen to haunt a certain shore or rock, it is taken to be somebody's ghost, and the name of the deceased is given to it. For example, at Ulawa, a dreaded man-eating shark received the name of a dead man and was propitiated with offerings of porpoise teeth. At Sa, certain food, for example, coconuts from particular trees, is reserved to feed such a ghost shark, but men of whom it is positively known that after death they will be in sharks are allowed by anticipation to partake of the shark food in a sacred place. Other men will sometimes join themselves to their company, and speaking with the voice of a shark ghost will say, "Give me to eat of that food." If such a man happens to be really possessed of supernatural power, he will in due time become a shark ghost himself, but it is perfectly possible that he may fail. In Savo, not very long ago, a certain man had a shark that he used to feed and to which he offered sacrifice. He swam out to it with food, called it by name, and it came to him. Of course it was not a common shark, but a ghost, the knowledge of which had been handed down to him from his ancestors. Alligators also may lodge the souls of dead Solomon Islanders. In the island of Florida, a story was told of an alligator that used to come up out of the sea and make itself quite at home in the village in which the man whose ghost it was had lived. It went by the name of the deceased, and though there was one man in particular who had special connection with it and was said to own it, the animal was on friendly terms with everybody in the place and would even let children ride on its back. But the village where this happened had not yet been identified. In the same island, the appearance of anything wonderful is taken as proof of a ghostly presence and stamps the place as sacred. For example, a man planted some coconut palms and almond trees in the bush and died not long afterwards. After his death, there appeared among the trees a great rarity in the shape of a white cuscus. The animal was accordingly assumed to be the ghost of the departed planter and went by his name. The place became sacred, and no one would gather the fruits of the trees there until two young men, who had been trained in the principles of Christianity, boldly invaded the sanctuary and appropriated the almonds and coconuts. It must not be supposed, however, that the choice of transmigration open to a Solomon Islander is restricted to the animal kingdom. He is free after death to become a vegetable, if he feels so disposed. When a mission school was established in the island of Ulawa, it was observed with surprise that the natives would not eat bananas and had ceased to plant the tree. Enquiry elicited the origin of the restriction, which was recent and well remembered. A man of great influence, dying not long before, had forbidden the eating of bananas after his death, saying that he would be in the banana. The older natives would still mention his name and say, "We cannot eat so-and-so." The doctrine of the transmigration of human souls into animals in ancient India. The doctrine of the reincarnation of human souls in the bodies of either of men or of animals, which meets us as an article of faith in so many savage tribes, has a special interest for the historian of thought, because it has been adopted more or less explicitly and employed not merely as a philosophical theory, but as a means of enforcing moral lessons by thinkers, teachers, and lawgivers among various civilized peoples, notably in ancient India and Greece. Thus, in the most famous of old Indian law books, the Laws of Manu, the penalties to be endured by evildoers in future births are described with a precision which leaves nothing to be desired. The degradation of the birth is exactly proportioned to the degree of moral guilt of the transgressor. For example, if a man has the temerity to censure his teacher, even though the censure is richly deserved, that rash man in his next birth will be an ass. But if he defames his teacher falsely, he will be a dog. And if he is so lost to all sense of property as to live at the expense of his teacher, he will be a worm. A faithless wife in her next transmigration will be born a jackal. A Brahmin who misappropriates money which he has received for a sacrifice will hereafter be either a vulture or a crow for the period of 100 years. Men who delight in doing hurt will be born as carnivorous animals, and those who eat forbidden food will be degraded into worms. As for thieves, their lot is a hard one, and is hard in proportion to the value of the article stolen. A man who steals gems will be born a goldfish. A man who steals grain will be born a rat. A man who steals honey will be born a stinging insect. And a man who steals clarified butter will be born an inhuman. The penalty for stealing silk is to become a partridge, for stealing lion a frog, for stealing vegetables a peacock, for stealing cooked food a porcupine, for stealing uncooked food a hedgehog, and for stealing molasses a flying fox. And so on for the various degrees of moral turpitude throughout the entire range of the animal kingdom. The doctrine of transmigration in Buddhism. Buddha himself, who gave an immense extension to the doctrine of transmigration by incorporating it in his religious, or rather philosophical system, is traditionally said to have undergone many animal births of various sorts before he attained to his supreme dignity. Thus it is reported that he was once a hare, once a dog, twice a pig, twice a frog, 4 times a serpent, 6 times a snipe, 10 times a lion, 11 times a deer, and 18 times a monkey, to say nothing of having been once a devil dancer, twice a thief, 83 times an ascetic, and so on. The doctrine of the transmigration of souls taught in ancient Greece by Pythagoras and Empedocles. In ancient Greece also, the theory of the transmigration of souls found favour with the early philosophers Pythagoras and Empedocles, both of whom, if we may trust tradition, appealed to their own personal experience in support of the doctrine. According to ancient writers, Pythagoras affirmed that he had been Euphorbus, the Trojan, in one of his former lives, and in proof of the assertion he identified the shield of Euphorbus among the Trojan spoils at Mycenae. He would seem to have held that human souls can transmigrate into animals or even into plants, and we may suppose that the possibility of such transmigrations was at least one of the reasons he alleged for enjoining the strictest of his disciples neither to kill nor to eat animals, and to abstain from certain vegetables such as beans and mallows. Certainly at a later time these principles were maintained and these precepts inculcated by Empedocles, who outdid the reminiscence of his predecessor by asserting that he himself in former lives had been a boy, a girl, a bush, a bird, and a fish. Hence he denounced as a crime the practice of killing and eating animals, since according to him a man could never know but that in slaughtering and eating an animal he might be murdering and devouring one of his dead kinsfolk. It might be his father or mother, his son or daughter. Thus, from the doctrine of transmigration, Empedocles logically drew the same practical conclusion as the savage, who abstains, for example, from killing and eating crocodiles or pigs because he believes that the souls of his departed relations to be embodied in crocodiles or pigs. The only important difference between the savage and the philosopher in this respect is that whereas the savage venerates and spares only animals of one particular species on the ground of their possible affinity to himself, the philosopher on his own showing was bound to abstain from all animals whatever, since according to him the spirits of his deceased relatives might be lurking in creatures of any species. Hence, while a faith in transmigration imposes but few restrictions on the diet of a savage, since it leaves him free to partake of the flesh of every sort of animals at but one, the creed of Empedocles logically cut him off from a flesh diet altogether, and compelled him to live on vegetables alone. Indeed, if he had been rigidly logical, he must have denied himself the use of vegetables also, and perished of hunger, since on his theory vegetables as well as animals may house the souls of the dead. However, like a wise man, he sacrificed logic to life, and contented himself with forbidding his disciples the use of a few vegetables, such as beans and laurels, while he suffered them to browse freely on all the rest. The doctrine of transmigration used by Pythagoras and Empedocles mainly to inculcate certain ethical precepts. So far as we can gather, the real opinions of Pythagoras and Empedocles from the traditional history of the one and the miserably mutilated writings of the other, they seem both, like Buddha, with whom they had much in common, to have used the old savage doctrine of the transmigration of souls mainly as a handle by which to impress on the minds of their followers the necessity of leading an innocent, pure, and even ascetic life in this world, as the only means of ensuring a blissful, or at all events, an untroubled eternity in a world to come. The pessimism of Empedocles, unlike the ordinary Greek view of life, its similarity to Buddhism. At least this is fairly certain for Empedocles, whose views are comparatively well known to us through the fragments of his philosophical writings. From these utterances of life, the genuineness of which seems to be beyond suspicion, we gather that the psychology of Empedocles was a curious blend of savagery and mysticism. He regarded the incarnation of the human soul in a body of any sort as a punishment for sin, a degradation, a fall from heaven, an exile from God, a banishment from a world of bliss to a world of woe. He describes the earth as a cavern, a joyless land, where men wander in darkness, a prey to murder and revenge, to swarms of foul fiends, to wasting sickness and decay. He speaks with pity and contempt of the life of mortals as a wretched and miserable existence, begotten of strife and sighs and prolonged as a punishment for their sins through a series of transmigrations, until by the exercise of virtue they have been born again as prophets, poets, physicians, and princes, and so return at last to communion with the gods who live thenceforth free from pain and sorrow, immortal, incorruptible, divine. This view of human destiny, this passionate scorn poured on the present world, this ecstatic aspiration after a blissful eternity, the reward of virtue in a world to come, are very alien from the cheerful serenity, the calm rationalism of the ordinary Greek attitude towards existence on earth. In his profound conviction of the manifold sufferings inseparable from mortality, in his longing to put off the burden of the body, or what he calls the garment of flesh, in his tenderness for the lower animals, and his strong sense of kinship with them, Empedocles resembled Buddha, whose whole cast of thought, however, was tinged with a still deeper shade of melancholy, a more hopeless outlook on the future. Yet so close in some respects is the similarity between the two that we might incline to suppose a direct influence of Buddhism on Empedocles, were it not that the dates of the two great thinkers, so far as they can be ascertained, appear to exclude the supposition. Analogy of the physical speculations of Empedocles to those of Herbert Spencer. But if on its ethical side, the teaching of Empedocles may almost be described as Buddhism relieved of its deepest shadows, on the scientific side, it curiously anticipated some speculations which have deeply stirred the European mind in our own and our fathers' days. For to his savage psychology and religious mysticism, Empedocles superadded a comprehensive and graduous theory of the material universe, which presents a close analogy to those of Herbert Spencer. The scientific doctrine of the conservation of energy, or as he preferred to call it, the persistence of force, which Spencer made the cornerstone of his system, has its counterpart in the Empedoclean doctrine of the conservation or indestructibility of matter, the sum of which, according to him, remains always constant, never undergoing either increase or diminution. Hence all the changes that take place in the physical world, according to Empedocles, resolve themselves into the integration and disintegration of matter, the composition and decomposition of bodies brought about by the two antagonistic forces of attraction and repulsion, which in mythical language he called love and hate. And just as all particular things are evolved by the force of attraction and dissolved by the force of repulsion, a state of concentration or aggregation in the individual perpetually alternating with a state of diffusion or segregation, so it is also with the material universe as a whole. It too alternately contracts and expands, according as the forces of attraction and repulsion alternatively prevail. For it was the opinion of Empedocles that a long, perhaps immeasurable period of time, during which the force of attraction prevails over the force of repulsion, is succeeded by an equally long period in which the force of repulsion prevails over the force of attraction, each period lasting until the predominant force being spent, its action is first arrested and then reversed by the opposite force, so that the material universe performs a periodic and rhythmic movement of alternate contraction and expansion, which never ceases except at the moments when, the two opposite forces exactly balancing each other, all things come to rest and equilibrium for a time, only, however, to return to the backward sweep of the cosmic pendulum, to their former state either of consolidation or of dispersion. Thus, under the influence of attraction and repulsion, matter is constantly oscillating to and fro. At the end of a period of contraction, it is gathered up in a solid globe. At the end of a period of expansion, it is diffused throughout space in a state of tenuity, which nowadays we might describe as gaseous. And this gigantic seesaw motion of the universe as a whole has gone on and will go on forever and ever. Herbert Spencer's theory of alternate periods of concentration and dissipation of matter. The imposing generalization thus formulated by Empedocles in the 5th century before our era was enunciated independently in the 19th century of our era by Herbert Spencer. Like his Greek predecessor, the modern English philosopher held that the material universe passes through alternate periods of contraction and dissipation, of evolution and dissolution, according as the forces of attraction and repulsion alternately prevail. The terms in which he sums up his general conclusions might be used with hardly any change to describe the conclusions of Empedocles. For the sake of comparison, it may be well to subjoin the passage. It runs as follows. Thus we are led to the conclusion that the entire process of things, as displayed in the aggregate of the visible universe, is analogous to the entire process of things as displayed in the smallest aggregates. Motion, as well as matter, being fixed in quantity, it would seem that the change in the distribution of matter which motion affects, coming to a limit in whichever direction it is carried, the indestructible motion thereupon necessitates a reverse distribution. Apparently, the universally coexistent forces of attraction and repulsion, which, as we have seen, necessitate rhythm in all minor changes through the universe, also necessitate rhythm in the totality of its changes, produce now an immeasurable period during which the attractive forces predominating cause universal concentration, and then an immeasurable period during which the repulsive forces predominating cause universal diffusion, alternate eras of evolution and dissolution. And thus there is a suggestion, the conception of a past during which there have been successive evolutions analogous to that which is now going on, and a future during which successive other such evolutions may go on, ever the same in principle, but never the same in concrete result. Evolutional dissolution. The most recent researches in physical science tend apparently rather to confirm than to invalidate these general views of the nature of the universe. For if modern physicists are right in regarding the constitution of matter as essentially electrical, the antagonistic forces of attraction and repulsion postulated by Empedocles and Spencer would resolve themselves into positive and negative electricity. On the other hand, the atomic disintegration which is now known to be proceeding in certain of the chemical elements, particularly in uranium and radium, and which is probably proceeding in all, suggests a doubt whether the universe is really, as Spencer supposed, in process of integration and evolution, and not rather in process of disintegration and dissolution. Or whether perhaps the apparent evolution of the organic world is not attended by a simultaneous dissolution of the inorganic, so that the fabric of the universe would be a sort of Penelope's web, which the great artificer weaves and unweaves at the same time. With such a grave doubt to trouble the outlook on the future, we may perhaps say that Empedocles was wiser than Herbert Spencer in leaving, as he apparently did, the question undecided, whether during the epoch open to human observation, the force of attraction or that of repulsion has been and is predominant, and consequently whether matter as a whole is integrating or disintegrating, whether all things are gradually evolving into more complex and concentrated forms or are gradually dissolving or wasting away through simpler and simpler forms into the diffuse tenuity of their primordial constituents. Empedocles as a forerunner of Darwin. Just as in his view of the constitution and history of the physical universe, Empedocles anticipated to some extent the theories of Spencer, so in his view of the development of living beings, he anticipated to some extent the theories of Darwin, for he held that the existing species of animals have been evolved out of inorganic matter through intermediate sorts of monstrous creatures, which, being ill-fitted to survive, gradually succumbed and were exterminated in the struggle for existence. Whether Empedocles himself clearly enunciated the principle of the survival of the fittest, as well as the doctrine of evolution, we cannot say with certainty. But at all events, it is significant that Aristotle, after stating for the first time the principle of the survival of the fittest, illustrates it by a reference to Empedocles' theory of the extinction of monstrous forms in the past, as if he understood the theory to imply the principle. Empedocles as a pretender to divinity. It is a remarkable instance of the strange complexities and seeming inconsistencies of human nature that a man whose capacious mind revolved ideas so far-reaching and fruitful should have posed among his contemporaries as a prophet or even as a god, parading the streets of his native city, bedecked with garlands and ribbons and followed by obsequious crowds of men and women, who worshipped him and prayed to him that he would reveal to them the better way, that he would give them oracles and heal their infirmities. In the character of Empedocles, as in that of another forerunner of science, Paracelsus, the sterling qualities of the genuine student would seem to have been alloyed with the vein of ostentation and braggadocio, but the dash of the mountebank which we may detect in his composition probably helped rather than hindered him to win for a time the favour and catch the ear of the multitude, ever ready as they are to troop at the heels of any quack who advertises his wares by a loud blast on a brazen trumpet. With so many claims on the admiration of the wise and the adulation of the foolish, we may almost wonder that Empedocles did not become the founder, if not the god, of a new religion. Certainly other human deities have set up in business and prospered with an intellectual stock in trade much inferior to that of the Sicilian philosopher. Perhaps Empedocles lacked the perfect sincerity of belief in his own pretensions, without which it seems difficult or impossible permanently to impose on the credulity of mankind. To delude others successfully is desirable, if not absolutely necessary, to begin by being oneself deluded, and the Sicilian sage was probably too shrewd a man to feel perfectly at ease in the character of a god. The doctrine of the transmigration of souls in Plato. The old savage doctrine of the transmigration of souls, which Empedocles furbished up and passed off on his disciples as a philosophical tenet, was afterwards countenanced, if not expressly affirmed, by another Greek philosopher of a very different stamp, who united, as no one else has ever done in the same degree, the highest capacity for abstract thought with the most exquisite literary genius. But if he borrowed the doctrine from savagery, Plato, like his two predecessors, detached it from its rude original setting and fitted it into an edifying moral scheme of retributive justice. For he held that the transmigration of human souls after death into the bodies of animals is a punishment or degradation entailed on the souls by the weakness to which they had been subject or the vices to which they had been addicted in life, and that the kind of animal into which a peculent soul transmigrates is appropriate to the degree and nature of its weakness or guilt. Thus, for example, the souls of gluttons, sots, and rakes pass into the bodies of asses. The souls of robbers and tyrants are born again in wolves and hawks. The souls of sober, quiet people, untinctured by philosophy, come to life as bees and ants. A bad poet may turn at death into a swan or a nightingale, and a bad jester into an ape. Nothing but a rigid practice of the highest virtue and a single-minded devotion to abstract truth will avail to restore such degraded souls to their human dignity and finally raise them to common with the gods. Though the passages in which these views are set forth have a mythical colouring and are, like all Plato's writings, couched in dramatic form and put into the mouths of others, we need not seriously doubt that they represent the real opinion of the philosopher himself. It is interesting and instructive to meet with the old savage theory of the transmigration of souls thus masquerading under a flowering drapery of morality and sparkling with the gems of Attic eloquence in the philosophic system of the great Greek thinker. So curiously alike may be the solutions which the highest and lowest intellects offer of those profound problems, which in all ages have engaged the curiosity and baffled the ingenuity of mankind. End of section 12. Section 13 of The Golden Bough, A Study in Magic and Religion, Part 5, Spirits of the Corn and of the Wild, Volume 2, by Sir James George Frazer. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recorded by Leon Harvey. Chapter 17. Types of Animal Sacrament. The Egyptian and the Aino Types of Sacrament. The ambiguous behavior of the Aino and the Gilyaks towards bears explained. We are now perhaps in a position to understand the ambiguous behavior of the Aino and Gilyaks towards the bear. It has been shown that the sharp line of demarcation which we draw between mankind and the lower animals does not exist for the savage. To him many of the other animals appear as his equals or even his superiors, not merely in brute force but in intelligence, and if choice or necessity leads him to undertake their lives, he feels bound, out of regard to his own safety, to do it in a way which will be as inoffensive as possible, not merely to the living animal, but to its departed spirit and to all the other animals of the same species which would resent an affront put upon one of their kind, much as a tribe of savages would revenge an injury or insult offered to a tribesman. We have seen that among the many devices by which the savage seeks to atone for the wrong done by him to his animal victims, one is to show marked deference to a few chosen individuals of the species, for such behavior is apparently regarded as entitling him to exterminate with impunity all the rest of the species upon which he can lay hands. This principle perhaps explains the attitude at first sight puzzling and contradictory of the Aino towards the bear. The flesh and skin of the bear regularly afford them food and clothing, but since the bear is an intelligent and powerful animal, it is necessary to offer some satisfaction or atonement to the bear species for the loss which it sustains in the death of so many of its members. This satisfaction or atonement is made by rearing young bears, treating them, so long as they live, with respect, and killing them with extraordinary marks of sorrow and devotion. So the other bears are appeased, and do not resent the slaughter of their kind by attacking the slayers or deserting the company, which would deprive the Aino of one of their means of subsistence. 2 forms of the worship of animals. Thus the primitive worship of animals assumes 2 forms, which are in some respects the converse of each other. On the one hand, animals are worshipped and are therefore neither killed nor eaten. On the other hand, animals are worshipped because they are habitually killed and eaten. In both forms of worship, the animal is revered on account of some benefit, positive or negative, which the savage hopes to receive from it. In the form of worship, the benefit comes either in the positive form of protection, advice, and help which the animal affords the man, or in the negative one of abstinence from injuries which it is in the power of the animal to inflict. In the latter worship, the benefit takes the material form of the animal flesh and skin. The 2 forms of worship are in some measure anti-ethical. In the one, the animal is not eaten because it is revered. In the other, it is revered because it is eaten. But both may be practiced by the same people, as we see in the case of the North American Indians, who, while they apparently revere and spare their totem animals, also revere the animals and fish upon which they subsist. The Aborigines of Australia have totemism in the most primitive form known to us, but so far as I am aware, there is no clear evidence that they attempt, like the North American Indians, to conciliate the animals which they kill and eat. The means which the Australians adopt to secure a plentiful supply of game appear to be primarily based not on conciliation but on sympathetic magic, a principle to which the North American Indians also resort for the same purpose. Hence, as the Australians undoubtedly represent a ruder and earlier stage of human progress than the American Indians, it would seem that before hunters think of worshipping the game as a means of ensuring an abundant supply of it, they seek to attain the same end by sympathetic magic. This again would show, what there is good reason for believing, that sympathetic magic is one of the earliest means by which man endeavours to adapt the agencies of nature to his needs. 2 types of animal sacrament, the Egyptian and the Aino type. Corresponding to the 2 distinct types of animal worship, there are 2 distinct types of the custom of killing the animal god. On the one hand, when the revered animal is habitually spared, it is nevertheless killed, and sometimes eaten, on rare and solemn occasions. Examples of this custom have been already given, and an explanation of them offered. On the other hand, when the revered animal is habitually killed, the slaughter of any one of the species involves the killing of the god, as atoned for on the spot by apologies and sacrifices, especially when the animal is a powerful and dangerous one. And in addition to this ordinary and everyday atonement, there is a special annual atonement, at which a select individual of the species is slain with extraordinary marks of respect and devotion. Clearly the 2 types of sacramental killing, the Egyptian and the Aino types, as we may call them for distinction, are liable to be confounded by an observer, and before we can say to which type any particular example belongs, it is necessary to ascertain whether the animal sacramentally slain belongs to a species which is habitually spared, or to one which is habitually killed by the tribe. In the former case, the example belongs to the Egyptian type of sacrament, in the latter to the Aino type. Examples of animal sacraments among the pastoral tribes. The practice of pastoral tribes appears to furnish examples of both types of sacrament. Pastoral tribes, says a learned ethnologist, being sometimes obliged to sell their herds to strangers who may handle the bones disrespectfully, seek to avert the danger which such a sacrilege would entail by consecrating one of the herd as an object of worship, eating it sacramentally in the family circle with closed doors, and afterwards treating the bones with all the ceremonious respect which, strictly speaking, should be accorded to every head of cattle, by which being punctually paid to the representative animal is deemed to be paid to all. Such family meals are found among various peoples, especially those of the Caucasus. ano or expiatory type of animal sacrament among the Abchases and Kalmucks. When amongst the Abchases, the shepherds in spring eat their common meal, with their loins girt and their staves in their hands. This may be looked upon both as a sacrament and as an oath of mutual help and support. For the strongest of all oaths is that which is accompanied with the eating of a sacred substance, since the perjured person cannot possibly escape the avenging God whom he has taken into his body and assimilated. This kind of sacrament is of the ano, or expiatory type, since it is meant to atone to the species for the possible ill usage of individuals. An expiation, similar in principle but different in details, is offered by the Kalmucks to the sheep, whose flesh is one of their staple foods. Rich Kalmucks are in the habit of consecrating a white ram under the title of the Ram of Heaven, or the Ram of the Spirit. The animal is never shorn and never sold, but when it grows old and its owner wishes to consecrate a new one, the old ram must be killed and eaten at a feast to which the neighbours are invited. On a lucky day, generally in autumn, when the sheep are fat, a sorcerer kills the old ram. After sprinkling it with milk, its flesh is eaten, the skeleton with a portion of the fat is burned on a turf altar, and the skin, with the head and feet, is hung up. Egyptian type of animal sacrament among the Todas and Mahdi. An example of a sacrament of the Egyptian type is furnished by the Todas, a pastoral people of southern India, who subsist largely upon the milk of their buffaloes. Amongst them the buffalo is to a certain degree held sacred, and is treated with great kindness, even with a degree of adoration by the people. They never eat the flesh of the cow buffalo, and as a rule abstain from the flesh of the male. But to the latter rule there is a single exception. Once a year all the adult males of the village join in the ceremony of killing and eating a very young male calf, seemingly under a month old. They take the animal into the dark recesses of the village wood, where it is killed with a club made from the sacred tree of the Todas, Betude, or Bilitonia, a sacred fire having been made by the rubbing of sticks. The flesh of the calf is roasted on the embers of certain trees, and is eaten by the men alone, women being excluded from the assembly. This is the only occasion on which the Todas eat buffalo flesh. The Mahdi or Moru tribe of Central Africa, whose chief wealth is their cattle, though they also practice agriculture, appear to kill a lamb sacramentally on certain solemn occasions. The custom is thus described by Dr. Felkin. A remarkable custom is observed at stated times, once a year, I am led to believe. I have not been able to ascertain what exact meaning is attached to it. It appears, however, to relieve the people's minds, for beforehand they evince much sadness and seem very joyful when the ceremony is duly accomplished. The following is what takes place. A large concourse of people of all ages assemble and sit down round a circle of stones, which is erected by the side of the road, really a narrow path. A very choice lamb is then fetched by a boy, who leads it 4 times around the assembled people. As it passes, they pluck off little bits of its fleece and place them in their hair, or on some other part of their body. The lamb is then led up to the stones, and they are killed by a man belonging to a kind of priestly order, who takes some of the blood and sprinkles it 4 times over the people. He then applies it individually on the children. He makes a small ring of blood over the lower end of the breastbone. On women and girls he makes a mark about the breasts, and the men he touches on each shoulder. He then proceeds to explain the ceremony, and to exhort the people to show kindness. When this discourse, which is at times of great length, is over, the people rise, each places a leaf on or by the circle of stones, and then they depart with signs of great joy. The lamb's skull is hung on a tree near the stones, and its flesh is eaten by the poor. This ceremony is observed on a small scale at other times. If a family is in any great trouble, through illness or bereavement, their friends and neighbours come together, and the lamb is killed. This is thought to avert further evil. The same custom prevails at the grave of departed friends, and also on joyful occasions, such as the return of a son home after a very prolonged absence. The sorrow thus manifested by the people at the annual slaughter of the lamb clearly indicates that the lamb slain is a sacred or divine animal, whose death is mourned by his worshippers, just as the death of the sacred buzzard was mourned by the Californians, and the death of the Theban ram by the Egyptians. The smearing each of the worshippers with the blood of the lamb is a form of communion with the divinity. The vehicle of the divine life is applied externally instead of being taken internally, as when the blood is drunk or the flesh eaten. 2. Processions with sacred animals. Form of communion with sacred animal by taking it from house to house. The form of communion in which the sacred animal is taken from house to house, that all may enjoy a share of its divine influence, has been exemplified by the Gilyak custom of promenading the bear through the village before it is slain. Effigy of a snake carried from house to house by members of the snake tribe. A similar form of communion with the sacred snake observed by a snake tribe in the Punjab. Once a year in the month of September, the snake is worshipped by all castes and religions for 9 days only. At the end of August, the Mirasans, especially those of the snake tribe, make a snake of dough which they paint black and red and place on a winnowing basket. This basket they carry around the village, and on entering any house they say, "God be with you all, may every ill be far, may our patrons, Gugas, word thrive." Then they present the basket with the snake, saying, "A small cake of flour, a little bit of butter. If you obey the snake, you and yours shall thrive." Strictly speaking, a cake and butter should be given, but it is seldom done. Everyone, however, gives something, generally a handful of dough or some corn. In houses where there is a new bride, or whence a bride has gone, or where a son has been born, it is usual to give a rupee and a quarter, or some cloth. Sometimes the bearers of the snake also sing, "Give the snake a piece of cloth, and he will send a lively bride." When every house has been thus visited, the dough snake is buried and a small grave is erected over it. Thither during the 9 days of September, women come to worship. They bring a basin of curds, a small portion of which they offer at the snake's grave, kneeling on the ground and touching the earth with their foreheads. Then they go home and divide the rest of the curds among the children. Here the dough snake is clearly a substitute for a real snake. Indeed, in districts where snakes abound, the worship is offered, not at the grave of the dough snake, but in the jungles where the snakes are known to be. Besides this yearly worship performed by all the people, the members of the snake tribe worship in the same way every morning after a new moon. The snake tribe is not uncommon in the Punjab. Members of it will not kill a snake, and they say that its bite does not hurt them. If they find a dead snake, they put clothes on it and give it a regular funeral. Hunting the wren in Europe. Ceremonies closely analogous to this Indian worship of the snake have survived in Europe into recent times, and doubtless date from a very primitive paganism. The best known example is the hunting of the wren. Sacred character of the wren in popular superstition. By many European peoples, the ancient Greeks and Romans, the modern Italians, Spaniards, French, Germans, Dutch, Danes, Swedes, English and Welsh, the wren has been designated the king, the little king, the king of birds, the hedge king and so forth, and has been reckoned among those birds which it is extremely unlikely to kill. In England it is supposed that if only one kills a wren or harries its nest, he will infallibly break a bone or meet with some dreadful misfortune within the year. Sometimes it is thought that the cows will give bloody milk. In Scotland the wren is called the Lady of Heaven's Hen. The boys say, "Melisons, Melisons, mair than 10, that hurry the Lady of Heaven's Hen." At St. Donan, in Brittany, people believe that if children touch the young wrens in the nest, they will suffer from the fire of St. Lawrence, that is, from pimples on the face, legs, and so on. In other parts of France it is thought that if a person kills a wren or harries its nest, his house will be struck by lightning, or that the fingers with which he did the deed will shrivel up and drop off, or at least be maimed, or that his cattle will suffer in their feet. Hunting the wren in the Isle of Man. Notwithstanding such beliefs, the custom of annually killing the wren has prevailed widely both in this country and in France. In the Isle of Man, down to the 18th century, the custom was observed on Christmas Eve, or rather Christmas morning. On the 24th of December, towards evening, all the servants got a holiday. They did not go to bed all night, but rambled about till the bells rang in all the churches at midnight. When prayers were over, they went to hunt the wren, and having found one of these birds, they killed it and fastened it to the top of a long pole, with its wings extended. Thus they carried it in procession to every house, chanting the following rhyme. We hunted the wren for Robin the Bobbin. We hunted the wren for Jack the Can. We hunted the wren for Robin the Bobbin. We hunted the red for every one. When they have gone from house to house and collected all the money they could, they laid the wren on a bier and carried it in procession to the parish churchyard, where they made a grave and buried it, with the utmost solemnity, singing dirges over her in the Manx language, which they called her Nell, after which Christmas begins. The burial over, the company outside the churchyard formed a circle and danced to music. About the middle of the 19th century, the burial of the wren took place in the Isle of Man on St. Stephen's Day, the 26th of December. Boys went from door to door with a wren suspended by the legs in the centre of two hoops, which crossed each other at right angles and were decorated with evergreens and ribbons. The bearers sang certain lines of which reference was made to boiling and eating the bird. If at the close of the song they received a small coin, they gave in return a feather of the wren, so that before the end of the day the bird often hung almost featherless. The wren was then buried, no longer in the churchyard, but on the seashore or in some waste place. The feathers distributed were preserved with religious care, it being believed that every feather was an effective preservative from shipwreck for a year, and a fisherman would have been thought very foolhardy who had not one of them. Even to the present time, in the 20th century, the custom is generally observed, at least in name, on St. Stephen's Day throughout the Isle of Man. Hunting the wren in Ireland and England. A writer of the 18th century says that in Ireland the wren is still hunted and killed by the peasants on Christmas Day and on the following, St. Stephen's Day. He is carried about, hung by the leg, in the centre of two hoops, crossing each other at right angles, and a procession made in every village of men, women and children singing in an Irish catch, importing him to be the king of all birds. Down to the present time, the hunting of the wren still takes place in parts of Leinster and Connaught. On Christmas Day or St. Stephen's Day, the boys hunt and kill the wren, fasten it in the middle of a mass of holly and ivy on the top of a broomstick, and on St. Stephen's Day go about with it from house to house, singing, the wren, the king of all the birds. St. Stephen's Day was caught in the furs. Although he is little, his family's great. I pray you, good landlady, give us a treat. Money or food, bread, butter, eggs, etc., were given them, upon which they feasted in the evening. In Essex, a similar custom used to be observed at Christmas, and the verses sung by the boys were almost identical with those sung in Ireland. In Pembrokeshire, a wren called the King used to be carried about on 12th Day in a box with glass windows surmounted by a wheel, from which hung various coloured ribbons. The men and boys who carried it from house to house sang songs, in one of which they wished joy, health, love and peace to the inmates of the house. Hunting the wren in France. In the first half of the 19th century, similar customs were still observed in various parts of the south of France. Thus at Carcassonne, every year, on the first Sunday of December, the young people of the street of Saint-Jean used to go out of the town armed with sticks, with which they beat the bushes looking for wrens. The first to strike down one of these birds was proclaimed king. Then they returned to the town in procession, headed by the king, who carried the wren on a pole. On the evening of the last day of the year, the king and all who had hunted the wren marched through the streets of the town to the light of torches, with drums beating and fifes playing in front of them. At the door of every house they stopped, and one of them wrote with chalk on the door, Vive le Roi, with the number of the year which was about to begin. On the morning of 12th Day, the king again marched in procession with great pomp, wearing a crown and a blue mantle and carrying a sceptre. In front of him was borne the wren fastened to the top of a pole, which was adorned with a verdant wreath of olive, of oak, and sometimes of mistletoe grown on an oak. After hearing high mass in the parish church of St. Vincent, surrounded by his officers and guards, the king visited the bishop, the mayor, the magistrates, and the chief inhabitants, collecting money to defray the expenses of the royal banquet, which took place in the evening and wound up with a dance. At intrigues, men and women used to hunt the wren on Christmas Eve. When they caught one alive, they presented it to the priest, who, after the midnight mass, set the bird free in the church. At Mirabelle, the priest blessed the bird. If the men failed to catch a wren and the women succeeded in doing so, the women had the right to mock and insult the men, and to blacken their faces with mud and soot when they caught them. At La Coitat, near Marseilles, a large body of men armed with swords and pistols used to hunt the wren every year about the end of December. When a wren was caught, it was hung in the middle of a pole, which 2 men carried, as if it were a heavy burden. Thus they paraded round the town. The bird was weighed in a great pair of scales, and then the company sat down to table and made merry. Religious possessions with sacred animals. The parallelism between this custom of hunting the wren and some of those which we have considered, especially the Gilyak possession with the bear and the Indian one with the snake, seems too close to allow us to doubt that they all belong to the same circle of ideas. The worshipful animal is killed with special solemnity once a year, and before or immediately after death he is promenaded from door to door, that each of its worshippers may receive a portion of the divine virtues that are supposed to emanate from the dead or dying god. Religious possessions of this sort must have a great place in the ritual of European peoples in prehistoric times, if we may judge from the numerous traces of them which have survived in folk custom. Ceremony of beating a man clad in a cow's skin in the Highlands of Scotland. A well-preserved specimen is the following, which lasted in the Highlands of Scotland and in St Kilda Down at last to the latter half of the 18th century. It was ascribed to Dr. Samuel Johnson in the island of Cole. Another description of it runs as follows. On the evening before New Year's Day, it is usual for the cowherd and the young people to meet together, and one of them is covered with a cow's hide. The rest of the company are provided with staves, to the end of which bits of raw hide are tied. The person covered with the hide runs thrice round the dwelling house, diceal, i.e., according to the course of the sun. The rest pursue, beating the hide with their staves and crying, "Here follows the Gaelic. Let us raise the noise louder and louder, let us beat the hide." Then they come to the door of each dwelling house, and one of them repeats some verses composed for the purpose. When admission is granted, one of them pronounces within the threshold the Benacred Thurlair, or verses by which he pretends to draw down a blessing upon the whole family. Here follows the Gaelic. May God bless the house and all that belongs to it, cattle, stones, and timber. In plenty of meat, of bed, and body clothes, the health of men may it ever abound. Then each burns in the fire a little of the bit of hide which is tied to the end of the staff. It is applied to the nose of every person and domestic animal that belongs to the house. This, they imagine, will tend much to secure them from diseases and other misfortunes during the ensuing year. The whole of the ceremony is called colunium, from the great noise which the hide makes. It is the principal remnant of superstition among the inhabitants of St Kilda. Another description of the Highland custom. A more recent writer has described the old Highland custom as follows. Towards evening on the last day of the year, or Hogmanay, as the day is called in Scotland, men began to gather and boys ran about shouting and laughing, playing shinty and rolling pigs of snow. Moken sneshta, i.e. large snowballs. The hide of the mart or winter cow, Seichamrat Igemrad, was wrapped around the head of one of the men, and he made off, followed by the rest, belabouring the hide, which made a noise like a drum, with switches. The disorderly procession went 3 times, diceal, according to the course of the sun, i.e. keeping the house on the right hand, round each house in the village, striking the walls and shouting on coming to a door. The Calurian of the yellow bag of hide strikes the skin upon the wall, an old wife in the graveyard, an old wife in the corner, an old wife beside the fire, a pointed stick in her 2 eyes, a pointed stick in her stomach. Let me in, open this. Before this request was complied with, each of the revellers had to repeat a rhyme called Ran Calurian, i.e. a Christmas rhyme, though, as might be expected when the door opened for one, several pushed their way in till it was ultimately left open for all. On entering, each of the party was offered refreshments, oatmeal bread, cheese, flesh, and a dram of whisky. Their leader gave them, the good man of the house, that indispensable adjunct of the evening's mummerks, the Cassian Arct, the breast stripe of a sheep wrapped round the point of a shinty stick. This was then singed in the fire, telak, put 3 times with the right-hand turn, desiel, round the family, and held to the noses of all. Not a drop of drink was given till the ceremony was performed. The Cassian Arct was also made of the breast stripe or tail of a deer, sheep, or goat, and as many as chose had one of them. Another writer who gives a similar account of the ceremony and to the verses sung by the performers tells us that the intention of putting the burnt sheepskin to the noses of the people was to protect them against witchcraft and every infection. The explanation, which is doubtless correct, reminds us of the extraordinarily persistent hold which the belief in sorcery and witchcraft has retained on the minds of the European peasantry. Formerly, perhaps, pieces of the cowhide in which the man was clad were singed and put to the noses of the people, just as in the Isle of Man a feather of the wren used to be given to each household. Similarly, as we have seen, the human victim whom the Khond slew as a divinity was taken from house to house, and every one strove to obtain a relic of his sacred person. Such customs are only another form of that communion with the deity which is attained most completely by eating the body and drinking the blood of the god. 3. The rites of Plough Monday. Processions of men disguised as animals, in which the animal seems to represent the corn spirit. In the hunting of the wren and the procession with the man clad in a cowskin, there is nothing to show that the customs in question have any relation to agriculture. So far as appears, they may date from a time when the invention of husbandry, when animals were revered as divine in themselves, not merely as divine because they embodied the corn spirit, and the analogy of the Gilead procession of the bear and the Indian procession of the snake is in favour of assigning the corresponding European customs to this very early date. On the other hand, there are certain European processions of animals, or of men disguised as animals, which may perhaps be purely agricultural in their origin. In other words, the animals which figure in them may have been, from the first, nothing but representatives of the corn spirit conceived in animal shape. Examples of such dramatic and at the same time religious rites have been collected by W. Manhart, who says of them in general, not only on the harvest field and on the threshing floor, but also quite apart from them, people love to represent the corn spirit dramatically, especially in solemn processions in spring and about the winter solstice, whereby they meant to depict the return of the beneficent powers of summer to the desolate realm of nature. The Shrovetide Bear in Bohemia. Thus, for example, in country districts of Bohemia, it is, or used to be, customary during the last days of the carnival for young men to go about in procession from house to house collecting gratitudes. Usually a man or boy is swathed from head to foot in pea straw and wrapped round in straw ropes. Thus attired, he goes by the name of the Shrovetide or Carnival Bear, Fastnachtstabar, and is led from house to house to the accompaniment of music and singing. In every house he dances with the girls, the maids, and the housewife herself, and drinks to the health of the good man, the good wife, and the girls. For this performance, the mummer is regaled with food by the good wife, while the good man puts money in his box. When the mummers have gone the round of the village, they betake themselves to the alehouse, whither also all the peasants repair with their wives. For at Shrovetide, but especially on Shrove Tuesday, every one must dance, if the flax, the vegetables, and the corn are to thrive, and the more and the higher they dance, the greater the blessing which the people expect to crown their exertions. In the Leeds district, the Shrovetide Bear, besides being wrapped in straw, sometimes wears a bear's mask to emphasize his resemblance to the animal. In the Czech villages, the housewives pluck the pea straw and other straw from the Shrovetide Bear and put it in the nests of their geese, believing that the geese will lay more eggs and hatch their broods better for the addition of this straw to their nests. For a similar purpose, in the Sars district, the women put the straw of the Shrovetide Bear in the nests of their hens. In these customs, the dancing for the express purpose of making the crops grow high, and the use of the straw to make the geese and hence lay more eggs, sufficiently prove that the Shrovetide Bear is conceived to represent the spirit of fertility, both animal and vegetable, and we may reasonably conjecture that the dances of the mummer with women and girls are especially intended to convey them the fertilizing powers of the spirit, whom the mummer personates. The oats goat, the peas bear, etc. In some parts of Bohemia, the straw-clad man in these Shrovetide processions is called not the bear, but the oats goat, and he wears horns on his head to give point to the name. These different names and disguises indicate that in some places the corn spirit is conceived as a bear, and in others as a goat. Many examples of the conception of the corn spirit as a goat have already been cited. The conception of him as a bear seems to be less common. In the neighborhood of Nilkowo, in Prussian Lithuania, the two ideas are combined. For the 12th day, a man wrapped in pea straw is represented a bear, and another wrapped in oat straw is represented a goat, go together about the village. They imitate the action of the two animals and perform dances, for which they receive a present in every house. At Marburg, in Steiermark, the corn spirit figures now as a wolf and now as a bear. The man who gave the last stroke at threshing is called the wolf. All the other men flee from the barn and wait till the wolf comes forth, whereupon they pounce on him, wrap him in straw to resemble a wolf, and so lead him about the village. He keeps the name of wolf till Christmas, when he is wrapped in a goat's skin and led from house to house as a peas bear at the end of a rope. In this custom, the dressing of the mummer in a goat's skin seems to mark him out as a representative of a goat, so that here the mythical fancy of the people apparently hesitates between a goat, a bear, and a wolf as a proper embodiment of the corn spirit. The Yule goat in Sweden. In Scandinavia, the conception of the spirit as a goat who appears at Christmas, Julbuk, appears to be common. Thus, for example, in Bergslagtaret, Sweden, it used to be customary at Christmas to lead about a man completely wrapped in corn straw and wearing a goat's horns on his head. He personated the Yule goat. In some parts of Sweden, a regular feature of the little Christmas drama is a pretense of slaughtering the Yule goat, who, however, comes to life again. The actor, hidden by a coverlet made of skins and wearing a pair of formidable horns, is led into the room by two men, who make believe to slaughter him, while they sing verses referring to the mantles of various colours, red, blue, white, and yellow, which they laid on him one after the other. At the conclusion of the song, the Yule goat, after feigning death, jumps up and skips about to the amusement of the spectators. In Wilstad, after supper on Christmas evening, while the people are dancing the angel dance for the sake of ensuring a good crop of flax, some long stalks of the Yule straw, either of wheat or rye, are made up into the likeness of a goat, which is thrown among the dancers with the cry, "Catch the Yule goat." The custom in Dalarn is similar, except that there the straw animal goes by the name of the Yule ram. In these customs, the identification of the Yule goat or the Yule ram with the corn spirit seems unmistakable. As if to clinch the argument, it is customary in Denmark and Sweden to bake cakes of fine meal at Christmas in the form of goats, rams, or boars. These are called Yule goats, Yule rams, or Yule boars. They are often made out of the last sheaf of corn at harvest and kept till sowing time, when they are partially mixed with the seed corn and partially eaten by the people and the plough oxen in the hope thereby of securing a good harvest. It seems scarcely possible to represent the identification of the corn spirit with an animal, whether goat, ram, or boar, more graphically. For the last corn cut at harvest is regularly supposed to house the corn spirit, who is accordingly caught, kept through the winter, in the shape of an animal, and then mixed with the seed in spring to quicken the grain before it is committed to the ground. Examples of the corn spirit conceived as the wether and a boar have met us in a preceding part of this work. The pretense of killing the Yule goat and bringing him to life again was probably in origin a magical rite to ensure the rebirth of the corn spirit in spring. The straw bear at Whittlesey. In England, a custom like some of the preceding still prevails at Whittlesey in Cambridgeshire on the Tuesday after Plough Monday. As I learn from an obliging communication of Professor G. C. Moore Smith of Sheffield University, he writes, "When I was at Whittlesey yesterday, I had the pleasure of meeting a straw bear, if not two, in the street. I had not been at Whittlesey on the day for nearly 40 years, and feared the custom had died out. In my boyhood, the straw bear was a man completely swathed in straw, led by a string by another, and made to dance in front of people's houses, in return for which money was expected. This always took place on the Tuesday following Plough Monday. Yesterday the straw bear was a boy, and I saw no dancing, otherwise there was no change. The ceremonies of Plough Monday in England. A comparison of this English custom with the similar continental customs which have been described above raises the presumption that the straw bear, who is thus led about from house to house, represents the corn spirit bestowing his blessing on every homestead in the village. The interpretation is strongly confirmed by the date at which the ceremony takes place, for the date is the day after Plough Monday, and it can hardly be doubted that the old popular celebration of Plough Monday has a direct reference to agriculture. Plough Monday is the first Monday of January after 12th day. On that day it used to be the custom in various parts of England for a band of sturdy swains to drag a gaily decorated plough from house to house and village to village, collecting contributions, which were afterwards spent on rustic revelry at a tavern. The men who drew the plough were called plough bullocks. They wore their shirts over their coats, and bunches of ribbons flaunted from their hats and persons. Among them there was always one who personated a much bedizened old woman called Bessie. Under his gown he formerly had a bullock's tail fastened to him behind, but this appendage was afterwards discarded. He skipped, danced, and cut capers, and carried a money box soliciting contributions from the onlookers. Some of the band, in addition to their ribbons, also wore small bunches of corn in their hats, from which the wheat was soon shaken out by the ungainly jumping which they called dancing. Occasionally, if the winter was severe, the procession was joined by threshers carrying their flails, reapers bearing their sickles, and carters with their long whips, which they were ever cracking to add to the noise, while even the smith and the miller were among the number, for the one sharpened the ploughshares, and the other ground the corn. And Bessie rattled his box and danced so high that he showed his worsted stockings and corduroy breeches, and very often, if there was a thaw, tucked up his gown skirts under his waistcoat, and shook the bonnet off his head, and disarranged the long ringlets that ought to have concealed his whiskers. Sometimes among the mummers there was a fool, who wore the skin of a calf with the tail hanging down behind, and wielding a stick with an inflated bladder tied to it, which he applied with rude vigour to the heads and shoulders of the human team. Another mummer generally wore a fox's skin in the form of a hood with the tail dangling on his back. If any churl refused to contribute to the money box, the plough bullocks put their shoulders to the plough and ploughed up the ground in front of his door. The object of the dances on Plough Monday is probably to ensure the growth of the corn. The clue to the meaning of these curious rites is probably furnished by the dances or other jumps of the men who wore branches of corn in their hats. When we remember how often on the continent about the same time of year the peasants dance and jump for the express purpose of making the crops grow tall, we may conjecture with some probability that the intention of the dances on Plough Monday was similar. The original notion, we may suppose, was that the corn would grow that year just as high as the dancers leaped. If that were so, we need not wonder at the agility displayed on these occasions by the yokels in general, and by Bessie in particular. What stronger incentive could they have to exert themselves than the belief that the higher they leaped into the air, the higher would sprout the cornstalks? In short, the whole ceremony was probably a magical rite intended to procure a good crop. The principle which it rested was the familiar one of homeopathic or imitative magic. By mimicking the act of ploughing and the growth of the corn, the mummers hoped to ensure the success of the real ploughing, which was soon to take place. The straw bear representative of the corn spirit. If such was the real meaning of the ritual of Plough Monday, we may the more confidently assume that the straw bear who makes his appearance at Whittlesey in Cambridgeshire on the day after Plough Monday represents indeed the corn spirit. What could be more appropriate than for that beneficent being to manifest himself from house to house the very day after a magical ceremony had been performed to quicken the growth of the corn? The rites of Plough Monday resemble the rites at the end of the carnival in Thrace. The foregoing interpretation of the rites observed in England on Plough Monday tallies well with the explanation which I have given of the very similar rites annually performed at the end of the carnival in Thrace. The mock ploughing is probably practiced for the same purpose in both cases, and what that purpose is may be safely inferred from the act of sowing and the offering of prayers for abundant crops which accompany and explain the Thracian ceremony. Similar rites are performed at the same time by the Bulgarian peasants of Thrace. It deserves to be noted that ceremonies of the same sort and closely resembling those of Plough Monday are not confined to the Greek villages of Thrace, but observed also by the Bulgarians of the province at the same time, namely on the Monday of the last week in Carnival. Thus at Malko Ternovsko, in the district of Adrianople, a procession of mummers goes through the streets on that day. The principal personages in it bear the names of the Kuker and Kukereka. The Kuker is a man clad in a goatskin. His face is blackened with soot, and he wears on his head a high shaggy hat made of an entire skin. Bells jingle at his girdle, and in his hand he carries a club. The Kukereka, who sometimes goes by the name of Baba, that is, old woman, is a man distinguished in petticoats, with his face blackened. Other figures in the procession are young men dressed as girls, and girls dressed as men and wearing masks. Bears are represented by dogs wrapped in bearskins. A king, a judge, and other officials are personated by other mummers. They hold a mock court, and those whom they condemn receive a bastinado. Some of the maskers carry clubs. It is their duty to beat all who fall into their hand, and to levy contributions from them. The playing gestures of the Kuker and Kukerika are wanton and lascivious. The songs and cries addressed to the Kuker are also very cynical. Towards evening, two of the company are yoked to a plough, and the Kuker ploughs a few furrows, which he thereupon sows with corn. After sunset, he puts off his disguise, is paid for his trouble, and carouses with his fellows. The people believe that the man who plays the part of the Kuker commits a deadly sin, and the priest makes fine efforts to abolish the custom. At the village of Kuria, in the district of Lozengrad, the custom is in general the same, but there are some significant variations. The money collected by the mummers is used to buy wine, which is distributed among all the villagers at a banquet in the evening. On this occasion, a cake in which an old coin has been baked is produced by the Kuker, broken into bits and so divided among all peasants. If the bit with the coin in it falls to a farmer, then the crops will be good that year, but if it falls to a herdsman, then the cattle will thrive. Finally, the Kuker ploughs a small patch of ground, bending his body to right and left in order to indicate symbolically the use of corn bending under the weight of the grain. The others lay hold of the man with whom the coin was found, bind him by the feet, and drag him over the land that has just been ploughed. The intention of the rites is clearly to fertilize the ground. In these observances, the intention of promoting the fertility of the ground is unmistakable. The ploughman's imitation of the cornstalks bending under his own weight is a simple case of homeopathic or imitative magic, while the omens drawn from the occupation of the person who obtains the piece of cake with the coin in it indicate that the ceremony is designed to quicken the herds as well as the crops. We can hardly doubt that the same serious motive underlies the seemingly wanton gestures of the principal actors and explains the loose character of the songs and words which accompany the ceremony. Nor is it hard to divine the reason for dragging over the fresh furrows the man who is lucky enough to get the coin in the cake. He is probably looked on as an embodiment of the corn spirit, and in that character is compelled to fertilize the ground by bodily contact with the newly ploughed earth. Similar customs are observed at the carnival in Bulgaria. Similar customs are observed at the carnival not only by Bulgarian peasants in Thrace, but also here and there in Bulgaria itself. In that country, the leading personage of the masquerade is the Baba, that is, the old woman or mother. The part is played by a man in woman's clothes. She, or rather he, wears no mask, but in many villages, she carries a spindle with which she spins. The Kuker and Kukerika also figure in the performance, but they are subordinate to the old woman or mother. Their costume varies in different villages. Usually they are clad in skins with a girdle of lime tree bark and 5 or 6 bells fastened to it. On their back they wear a hump made up of rags. But the principal feature in their attire consists of the masks, which represent the heads of animals and men in fantastic combinations, such as the horned head of a man or a bird, the head of a ram, a bull, and so on. Much labour is spent on the manufacture of these masks. Early in the morning of Cheese Monday, the Monday of the last week in Carnival, the mummers go about the village levying contributions. Towards noon they form a procession and go from house to house. In every house they dance a round dance while the old woman spins. It is believed that if any householder contrives to carry off the old woman and secrete her, a blessing and prosperity will enter into his dwelling. But the maskers defend the old woman stoutly against all such attempts of individuals to appropriate her beneficial presence. After the dance, the mummers receive gifts of money, eggs, meal, and so on. Towards evening, a round dance is danced in the village square, and there the old woman yokes the cooker and cucarica to a plough, ploughs with it a small piece of ground, and sows the ground with corn. Next day the performers reassemble, sell the presents they had collected, and with the produce hold a feast in the house of the old woman. It is supposed that if strange maskers make their way into a village, fertility will be drawn away to the village from which they have come. Hence the villagers resist an inroad of strange maskers at any price. In general, the people believe that the masquerade is performed for the purpose of increasing the luck and fertility of the village. In all these cases, the ceremonial ploughing and sowing are probably charms to ensure the growth of the crops. In these Bulgarian rites, accordingly, we are not left to form conjectures as to the intention with which they are practiced. That intention is plainly avowed, and it is no other than the one which we have inferred for the similar rites observed in Thrace at the same season and in England on Plough Monday. In all these cases it is reasonable to suppose that the real aim of the ceremonial ploughing and sowing of the ground is thereby, on the principles of homeopathic or imitative magic, to ensure the growth of the corn on all the fields of the community. Perhaps we may go a step further and suggest that in the Bulgarian, old woman or mother, who guides the plough and sows the seed, and whose presence is believed to bring a blessing to any household that can contrive to appropriate her, we have the rustic prototype of Demeter, the corn mother, who, in the likeness of an old woman, brought a blessing to the house of Celeus, king of Eleusis, and restored their lost fertility to the fallow Eleusinian fields. And in the pair of mummers, man and woman, who draw the plough, may we not discern the rude originals of Pluto and Persephone? If that is so, the gods of Greece are not wholly dead. They still hide their diminished heads in the cottages of the peasantry, to come forth on sunshine holidays and parade with a simple but expressive pageantry among a gazing crowd of rustics at the very moment of the year when their help is most wanted by the husbandman. Such rites no doubt date from a remote antiquity. Be that as it may, these rites still practiced by the peasantry at opposite ends of Europe no doubt date from an extremely early age in the history of agriculture. They are probably far older than Christianity, older even than those highly developed forms of Greek religion with which ancient writers and artists have made us familiar, but which have been for so many centuries a thing of the past. Thus it happens that, while the fine flower of the religious consciousness in myth, ritual, and art is fleeting and evanescent, its simpler forms are comparatively stable and permanent, being rooted deep in those principles of common minds which bid fair to outlive all the splendid but transient creations of genius. It may be that the elaborate theologies, the solemn rites, the stately temples, which now attract the reverence or the wonder of mankind, are destined themselves to pass away like all Olympus's faded hierarchy, and that simple folk will still cherish the simple faiths of their nameless and dateless forefathers, who still believe in witches and fairies, in ghosts and hobgoblins, will still mumble the old spells and make the old magic passes. When the muezzin shall have ceased to call the faithful to prayer from the minarets of St. Sophia, and when the worshippers shall gather no more in the long-drawn aisles of Notre Dame and under the dome of St. Peter's. End of section 13. Section 14 of The Golden Bough, A Study in Magic and Religion, Part 5, Spirits of the Corn and of the Wild, Volume 2, by Sir James George Frazer. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recorded by Leon Harvey. Note: the ceremony of the horse at rice harvest among the Garos. Effigy of a horse in a harvest festival of the Garos. Among the Garos, an agricultural tribe of Assam, the close of the rice harvest is celebrated by a festival in which the effigy of a horse figures prominently. The intention of the ceremony is not stated, but possibly it may be to ensure a good rice crop in the following year. If so, the artificial horse of the Garos would be analogous to the October horse of the Romans, as that animal has been explained by W. Manhart. For the sake of comparison, it may be well to subjoin Major A. Playfair's account of the Garos ceremony. Major Playfair's description of the festival. When the rice harvest has been fully gathered in, the great sacrifice and festival of the year, the Wangala or Gerawata, takes place. This is the most festive observance of the year and combines religious sacrifice with much conviviality. It is celebrated by all sections of the tribe except the Duals and some plains Garos. The cost of the entertainment falls principally on the Nokma, headman of the village, who provides a pig to be eaten by his guests and plenty of liquor. Among the Akawis and Chizaks of the north and northeastern hills, a curious feature of the ceremony is the manufacture of gure, or horses out of pieces of plant stem for the body and of bamboo for the head and legs. The image of the horse is laid on the floor of the Nokma's house, and the assembled guests dance and sing round it the whole night long, with the usual intervals for refreshments. Early the next morning, the horse is taken to the nearest river and launched on the water to find its way downstream on the current. For those who possess the necessary paraphernalia, the gure takes the shape of a horse's head of large size, made of straw and covered with cloth. I once saw one in the village of Rongrong, which, when in use, was ornamented with discs of brass on both sides of the face. Its eyes and ears were made of the same metal, and between the ears were fixed a pair of wild goat's horns. To the head were attached a number of bronze bells similar to those hawked about by Bhutia peddlers. The owner, a Leskar, was unable to tell me whence they came, but said that they were inherited from his wife's mother, and were many generations old. Dance of a man wearing the mask of a horse's head. The manner in which this form of gure is used is the following. The head is mounted on a stick, which a man holds before him in such a way that the head comes up to the level of his chest. 2 straps pass over his shoulders to relieve his hands of the weight. The body of the horse is then built round his own body with cane and cloth. For a tail, yak's tails are fastened in with his own hair, which for the occasion is allowed to hang down instead of being tied up. The performer thus apparelled commences to dance a shuffling step to the usual music. In front of him dances the priest, who goes through the pantomime of beckoning the animal to come to him. The remaining guests of the Nokma, headman, form a queue behind the horse and dance after it. When the first man gets tired, another takes his place, and the dance goes on right through the night. A pleasant part of the performance is the pelting of the gure with eggs. A piece of eggshell was still sticking to the horn of the gure, which was shown to me. Strictly speaking, this festival should last for 3 days and 2 nights. When it is over, the gure is taken to a stream and the body thrown into the water, the head being preserved for another year. The people who come to see it off bring rice with them, and a meal by the water's edge closes the proceedings. At the Wangala, it is accustomed to mix flour with water, and for the assembled people to dip their hands into the mixture and make white hand marks on the posts and walls of the house and on the backs of the guests. The effigy of the horse at rice harvest perhaps represented the spirit of the rice. Can it be that the horse whose effigy is thus made at rice harvest and thrown into the water, while the head is kept for another year, represents the spirit of the rice? If that was so, the pelting of the head with eggs would be a charm to ensure fertility, and the throwing of it into water would be a rain charm. And on the same theory, the horse's head would be comparable to the horse-headed Demeter of Pharsalia, as well as to the head of the October horse at Rome, which was nailed to a wall, probably to be kept there till next October. If we knew more about the rites of the horse-headed Demeter at Pharsalia, we might find that amongst them was a dance of a man or woman who wore the mask of a horse's head and personated the goddess herself, just as, if I am right, the man who dances disguised as a horse at the harvest festival of the Garos represents the spirit of the rice dancing among the gathered sheaves. The conjecture is to some extent supported by the remains of the magnificent marble drapery which once adorned the colossal statue of Demeter or Persephone in the sanctuary of the two goddesses at Lycosura in Arcadia. From that drapery are carved rows of semi-human, semi-bestial figures dancing and playing musical instruments. The bodies of the figures are those of women, but their heads, paws, and feet are those of animals. Among the heads set on the figures are those of a horse, a pig, a cat or a hare, and apparently an ass. It is reasonable to suppose that these dancing figures represent a ritual dance which was actually performed in the rites of Demeter and Persephone by masked men or women who personated the goddesses in their character of beasts. End of section 14, and the end of The Golden Bough, A Study of Magic Religion, Part 5, Spirits of the Corn and of the Wild, Volume 2, by Sir James George Frazer. Recorded by Leon Harvey.